Brzezinski was the strategist for Jimmy Carter and convinced Jimmy Carter to say, look, the Russians are dominating Afghanistan with a civilian secular government. Let's create al-Qaeda. Let's back Osama bin Laden and give his supporters weapons to begin fighting the Russians, and we can pull a coup d'etat there, and the Russians will fight back, and then we'll say the Russians invaded. And it worked. Saudi Arabia made a deal with America that they would push the Wahhabi extremists, the al-Qaeda, the most right-wing wing of Islamic parties, and it worked. Essentially, al-Qaeda is a contract army for the United States. Well, the same thing was happening in Russia. What Brzezinski wrote was that America's faced with a possibility of not being able to rule the world unilaterally. Any country's economic ability to be self-sufficient means potential military power. And in order to prevent any country from threatening America militarily, you have to prevent it from developing economically. The American nightmare, Brzezinski wrote, was that Russia would get together with Germany and with Western Europe, creating Russian raw materials, German industry, and somehow, finally, Russia would become westernized. America, under Brzezinski's strategy, said this would be a disaster because if Russia's westernized, if it becomes democratic, if Europe and Russia are prosperous, then we cannot control them anymore, and they will have no reason to be NATO. We've got to stop Russia, and the place to stop this Russian-European conglomeration is to split it right at the border down Ukraine. Let's do in Ukraine what we did in Afghanistan. Let's back the crazies. Well, most of them are the former neo-Nazi groups that have been so prominent that fly the Nazi flag.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Monday, June 3rd, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. Follow up on yesterday's conversation of the ceasefire, and as I framed it today, the lie from Israel imploding. And again, if you've been following, not the first time, not even the second time, but the second most prominent time that we've seen in a really public display where they have offered something through the United States, which is accepted by Hamas, which is then refused by Israel, or a very interesting dynamic, which I was on the Final Countdown this morning radio show talking about this. It just seems that even people that follow this stuff extensively are confused by what's going on. And this is interesting to me because it's actually very clear. The only thing that's confusing the issue is all of the lies and aggressive dishonesty coming from people like the United States government and plenty of corporate media platforms. Now, we're going to actually start today with an interesting conversation, which is why I open with that clip of Ukraine in Syria. And it's not that crazy when you understand like what he just described, but it might be kind of shocking for those that don't recognize the background. And what's interesting is, the Azov movement and the discussion he's having there, going back long before, the current iteration of what we're discussing is, as he described Al-Qaeda, which is, if you've watched James Corbett's documentaries and plenty of other good work, Ben Swan, it's an amazing documentary on this, that it's a contract army for the United States. I mean, we need to be able to have an honest conversation about this today. This is what the facts show. It's sort of like the way that the Israel conversation is just exploding right now with things that have been self-evident for 50 years for most people, if you've cared to look into this and beyond the screams of anti-Semitism and everything else. This is what's so infuriating for so many that have been objectively following this, is that for some reason, I mean, I think we can tell why, but there's been a lot of these moments in the past that have been really jarring with terrible things. And now it just, some reason, people, and I'm not talking corporate media, I don't trust the way that they're pretending they now discovered this, but it is breaking through. And it's the same conversation that if we're going to talk about Al-Qaeda and ISIS, we need to truly understand and be honest about what these really are. And again, I could argue that things have changed since that was put in place. And now maybe, as Saudi Arabia has even admitted over the years, they've sort of lost control of some of these elements. My point is we still need to acknowledge where they came from. And so the discussion of the contract army in Ukraine, Operation Aerodynamic discussion we've had, the CIA cultivating this fascist entity in Ukraine and elsewhere to use at that point against the Soviet Union, just like the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, like he described in against the Soviet Union. And as he's describing there, he's talking about post that time period in using Ukraine, as we're discussing today, to manipulate Russia. And so now seeing these elements end up in Syria, understanding what's going on with Israel and the larger Middle East dynamic, and points we're going to make today in regard to the Golan Heights with Lebanon and with Israel, and from Syria's perspective, that all of a sudden we find their contract army of the Azov movement and their Ukrainian extremists finding themselves in Syria. Is that just by coincidence, or is it because it's obviously being moved like a chess piece into a place where they need it? I think it's very obvious. But what we have to understand is that this is not just about one group or the other. This is about a larger manipulative game that's being played with human lives. And the fact that they're there shows you something very concerning, I think, about how this is getting bigger. But we also, as he described in the opening clip there, we realize the part that he doesn't get into, because what he's really discussing is sort of a U.S.-centric perspective, is the Israeli involvement in all of that. And we'll go through this, like I've shown many times. But we're going to talk about that first. We're going to talk about the ceasefire implosion, because it's only gotten more incredible. I just directly from Israeli media highlighting exactly what we were just talking about. And even as that's happening, we have Matt Miller pretending like this has shifted and now it's still back on Hamas. Hamas, who has accepted the deal, they're now waiting for Hamas to accept the deal that they've already accepted. Because the only way you can spin this is to make it seem like Hamas has yet to take or it's all on them. The onus is on Hamas, as Blinken and Matt Miller have all said, despite the fact that they've accepted the nearly identical plan it's just, if you watch what's going on, it seems confusing, and this doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up, but it really does. A plan was offered through the United States that Israel was involved with, as their own media and their own cabinet has made clear. They offered that to Hamas. Hamas accepted, and now they've spun up this entire confusing narrative to make it seem like they didn't just walk away from what they've already offered. Because the only conclusion you can come to when looking at that, without all the narrative, is that Israel actually doesn't want the ceasefire. And even if you pretend that they secondarily really want their hostages back, it's clear that it's still secondary to everything else they want. So they're willing to sacrifice the lives of their people to get whatever else they're trying to accomplish done. Which, by the way, is pretty much what everybody in Israel is now saying, including their mainstream media. But you won't hear that if you listen to Blinken and Biden and Matt Miller and the rest of our corporate media, because even though they're beginning to give you some level of the truth, it's clear that they're still bowing in very clear ways and covering up certain, like the thing I said yesterday, where you'll get these clips, 99% truth, even though it's largely superficial and surface level, and even though it's shocking to some people because the mainstream media is saying the things that we've proven this whole time, but there's 1% lie in there, but very important lie. And so it gets washed, you kind of see all the truth, and that lie gets put, what's the right word for it? It finds its way in and you don't realize it. And the point is, that's the most alarming type of lie. 90% truth with an important lie buried in it. And I think that's a lot of what's happening now. Overall point right there is to say that the corporate media, despite saying some things that are true, are, in my opinion, still very much playing the part. We're also going to talk about a segment that I keep kicking down the road over the last couple of days that I briefly highlighted, that I really want to take time to explain. Even though you all very much know this, I just want to make this very clear, and hopefully we'll make a clip about this, the human shield dynamic. The undeniable reality that Israel regularly uses human shields, and they have been since October 7th, in a flagrant way, right in front of everybody, being filmed half the time, and it goes a long way back. That's not to say that Hamas isn't doing that or capable of doing that, but I'd sure love some evidence. I'd love some evidence to highlight, and I would be the first to show it if we had actual evidence of Hamas using human shields, even though we don't have that. And I think it's clear that, as Robert has highlighted, the UN's own investigations have shown over the years, not that they say it's not happening, but they don't have evidence that shows that it's happening. All we have is Israel saying it. Again, I'm not even going to debate that it's possible, but evidence should matter to real journalists. And of course, a couple of other important things, a part about the aid that I'm going to consistently continue to follow up on, because I think it's very striking how obvious the lies are around the aid. And it just continues to show, I think, those that even are paying attention, how desperate they truly are if their best effort is to just go all of that's not true. I'm just going to say a false number, and we're all going to pretend like that's the truth. 1,000 trucks came through yesterday, except literally everybody other than Israel, even the United States, is going, that's not true. And I just think that's important to continue to highlight. So let's start with the important point here in regard to, first, this is a point before we even get into Syria that I really kind of, I guess the way to frame this would be the illusion of what we pretend that this country, rather this government actually is. I think that's less and less important these days, because I think most Americans have become, at least recently, but if not, I think it's been going on a lot longer than recently, but post October 7th, and even just post COVID-19, really have become disillusioned with what their government really is. And I think this is very important, because that's not un-American to acknowledge what's actually going on, even though the partisan paradigm screamers will make you think that, because they're desperately trying to maintain the status quo that they're benefiting from. But here, Sputnik reports, U.S. State Department forced Scott Ritter off a plane, headed to Russia, and confiscated his passport. Sounds like a free country to me, right? And realize that they're not arguing. It's simply because of what he's talking about. And it says, quote, as I was boarding my flight out of New York, I was pulled aside. So he's in the United States, pulled aside by three Border Patrol officers who seized my passport. When asked why, they said, orders of the State Department. Sounds like an authoritarian government to me. Dictatorship. It says no further information was provided. Is that democracy? Is that a representative government? Is that a republic? No. This is, my bags were removed from the flight, and I was escorted out of the airport. Now, if it turns out he is not just accused of, but guilty of some monumental crime where that was justified, then we can have another conversation here. But realize that that's not how this is even supposed to go. If you're being charged with a crime, you're being told about that. You're arrested. Here's the crime. This is different, and you can tell by the way it's going down. He is being investigated or interrogated based on the fact that he's one of those uncomfortable truth tellers. That's how I would frame this. But you have to realize that he's not being, I think it's becoming, actually the next part, I'll just hold off. It'll make it very clear. He was slated to participate in the annual St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, because God forbid you should engage a whole or another society while that society is being dehumanized by a corrupt government. Because that's the point here. Because even the game has always been played in the past that, even, I shouldn't say game, because in history, even going back to Reagan and many forward, the idea was that diplomacy was important. The classic Gorbachev and the whole thing, the point being that even when you're at war, you're supposed to be able to have diplomacy and discuss things with adversaries rather. Today, we get in this ridiculous hyperbolic world where that's just impossible. North Korea, the rest of it's just off the table. And Trump flirts with the idea of speaking with one of them, and they have 45 days of nonstop coverage of how he's a tyrant. It's crazy stuff. So my point is, here is somebody going to engage with this other society, which we should be able to do as a free country, but he gets pulled off because he's not allowed to. And the same point here, guess who else? Former New Jersey Superior Court Judge Andrew Napolitano, author and host of Judging Freedom podcast. Perfect name for this. It's, almost too perfect. Judging Freedom on YouTube, and make sure you check it out. He was also taken off the plane to Russia along with Scott Ritter, who was set to speak at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. A former judge. Now, it's not saying to say they're not capable of crimes, but we have to realize that what's happening and the way it's already gone down, they were not arrested and charged with a crime. They've been taken by your government. This would be alarming, and it should be even now if this was in if this was in China or Russia. Do you know the way your government would be framing this? This is what authoritarian governments do with their secret police, swinging in and taking people and interrogating them. This is the United States. So I just hope we can get past this illusion that we have about what our government is pretending to be. Not that we aren't capable of making that the reality. That's the important thing to understand. I believe deeply in what we pretend we are in this country rather than what we are supposed to be. I believe deeply in the idea of the Constitution. And I know plenty, even watching this show, don't agree with that, but I do. I believe it's important, and I believe can lead to something that is about a free society. But when we're watching this, when we're watching a government point to that thing, the Constitution, and act like they support it, and then in every single breath and everything they do, undermine and contradict and attack that thing, we need to see that they don't actually believe that. And these small things, and I should only say small because it's the thing, it's around a lot of bigger topics and a lot of the agenda. Like even when we're talking about Ukraine and Russia or Israel and Gaza, these are the events it's connected to. They're going there to speak on these things, and they know their opinions, which are counter to the U.S. narrative. That's what this is really about. Now, keep an eye on it. We need to watch what happens, because I mean, I'd like to believe this isn't going to get worse, that they're going to get talked to and reprimanded, and maybe their passports frozen or get on the blacklist. But if anything else than that happens, I mean, that will just prove my point. So we need to keep an eye on it. But it's definitely alarming. In another point, in France, a woman was fined for wearing her kippah after the pretext that it means, and this is how the game is being played, Free Palestine means kill all the Jews, right? The pretext that it means she's participating in a legal protest. Democracy. Now there's different kinds of protests that are illegal. I mean, how do you even pretend that aligns with any concept of free, constitutional rights in the United States or any other concept of freedom? That you're allowed to say, well, you can't protest for that. Yeah, guess just like the United States and Texas, you can't protest BDS. He's made laws against it, even though technically that law is repugnant to the Constitution. Mayberry versus Madison, Supreme Court ruling means it's null and void, but nobody cares because these people aren't actually fighting for the Constitution. They're actively undermining it. But here in France, it says even though she was alone. So apparently she's participating in a, quote, illegal protest, but she's not with a protest, but nonetheless, she's fined for it. Now, here's the great point that Arnaud Bertrand makes in this tweet. It says, like Iran's morality police, but for a religion that sanctifies Israel's actions. The point is that everybody in France, or the governments, I should say, in the United States and the UK, can't stop screaming Israel about Iran, about how bad and archaic and talk. They point to the idea of the hijab and the whole conversation within it. And yet here they are, literally beginning legal action against a person simply because they wear something that they disagree with. How is that any different? Obviously, the argument would be that it's wrong. They throw people off of the building for X, Y, and Z, which, by the way, that's not that story is much more nuanced than the people give it credit for, or the idea that there's a lot more going on. It's not like saying the U.S. does one thing. There's clearly different parties and different people and different actions. The point is that the way they represent Iran is egregiously dishonest, if not outright false. And we've talked about this a lot. Doesn't mean they don't have their problems. Clearly, in my opinion, I don't really trust any government. But the idea that somehow they're the counterbalance to the U.S. freedom, it's embarrassing. And this is the point from the beginning. We need to see these things for what it really is. Criticize Iran in every way that you think is necessary. Same thing with the United States. But what's the right word? To make these things up. There's a word I'm looking for, is to, embellish or completely manufacture these illusions about the countries that they're trying to manipulate or remove from power. Pretty sure that's about removing them from power and manipulating the country as opposed to keeping you safe. But decide for yourself. Now, Thomas Massey, in regard to Israel, highlights a post he put, or a poll that he put out. Now, this is almost 150,000 votes. But again, it's a poll on Twitter, which I don't trust, and it's a poll with his audience, so that's going to be slanted to some degree. But just to highlight that we keep getting these screaming polls coming from the Israeli representatives or the Zionist supporters that say everybody in the United States supports Israel, which is just easy to prove isn't true. But Thomas Massey did his own poll. Which of the foreign countries meddles in the most U.S. politics? 67% said Israel. 21% said China. 4, Russia. 8, other. Which is just funny because Russia seems to be the most stressed concept, but the right far more says China at this point. I think all of them, that's what other countries seem to do. The U.S. does it more than anybody. Manipulates foreign policy, maybe Israel more than anybody. It's hard to tell, but real clear that the all countries are capable of and actively try to meddle and influence. That's what they do. So the CIA is made for in their mind. That's why I don't think any of these things should exist really, but that's important to see. That the 67% of this country, based on his poll, definitely thinks that Israel's not on your side, or at the very least that they shouldn't be doing what they're doing. But here is Dan Cohen highlighting Nikki Haley. Same point I was just making, where she says, despite what we hear on college campuses and see in the media, don't trust your lying eyes, the majority of Americans stand with Israel. Now, what's funny is, see in the media, what we are seeing largely in the media would be kind of the opposite, mixed with a little bit of truth right now. But it's interesting because that really shows you that even they recognize they're losing control of this narrative, or rather have lost within the first couple of weeks control of this narrative. So she's saying, regardless of whatever else you're seeing, it's not true. We all love Israel. She's talking about herself and her lackeys. Israelis are not just fighting their own enemies in the Middle East. They're fighting ours too. Oh, was that the case? Oh, really? Rather, what they've done is turned their enemies into the United States government's enemies. right? So now because Israel has Middle East enemies, that's now become, it's not the other way around. And we've proven this over the years. As anybody with a brain can see, that the United States government has been driven into fighting the wars of Israel. And Netanyahu has many different leaked videos where he's laughing about how easy it is to manipulate the US government in just this way. But it says in our meetings with Israel's war cabinet and leaders, which again, why is Nikki Haley meeting with war cabinet? I mean, what is she right now? A citizen? Why is it happening? Well, I quite frankly think it's because she's about to be part of Trump's dangerous government that's selected already. We'll see what happens there. I don't even think half people that support Trump like Nikki Haley, but whatever. She seems to be a lunatic at the level of Lindsey Graham, in my opinion. But she says, we expressed our steadfast support of the American people. You don't speak for the American people, Nikki Haley, to decimate Hamas, bring security to Israel's borders and its people. And again, the idea that this is somehow the responsibility of the United States, it makes no sense, other than that's why she started the framing as, because they're fighting our enemies too. So it's not like we're obligated. Saying, and to continue to dismantle the terrorist network of our mutual enemy, Iran. Of course, that's the point, right? It's all about Iran. I mean, Elon Levy's been going on a screaming tear the last couple of days, just every 30 seconds posting about how it's a seven-front war only against Iran and their allies and everything else. Rather than what they frame it as their proxies. It's not the reality. It says, thank you to our Israeli brothers and sisters for bravely standing for freedom and democracy. Is that children being decimated is freedom and democracy? Well, according to them, just ask, well, she's not around anymore, thank God, but ask Madeleine Albright. Oh, it's worth it. 500,000 children being killed. It's worth it. Yeah, that wasn't an accident, guys. That's who they really are. Now, here is what Dan Cohen said about this. Israel can't defeat Hamas in Gaza. By the way, this is what their experts have been saying in Israel. That's what their mainstream media has covered. The reality is clear. Israel has been begrudgingly coming to terms with what is really happening, and their corporate media has been highlighting it. I think they wrote an article a week and a half ago or more saying Israel has lost this war and we need to accept it. He says it definitely can't defeat Hezbollah in Lebanon, which we'll make a point about in a second, which is much better equipped. And Robert has been highlighting this for a long time. And Israel actually very, very clearly knows that. I think that's why it's important to them that they maintain the United States in all of this. But it says the U.S. won't go to war with Iran for Israel, which, it's hard to say that. I mean, it's kind of hard not to see that the United States has seemingly destroyed everything, the government that is, that they've been trying to manipulate you about for this agenda. So it's hard to say. And I would argue that if they did something large enough, which scares me, that the United States the government would almost be how they wouldn't be able to pull away from something like that. But I hope he's right. But it says Ansar Allah in Yemen and the Iraqi resistance remain undeterred. There are massive protests against the Israeli government. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis are displaced from the north and openly talk of secession, which is interesting. We've talked about that briefly. We're talking about illegal settlements and rabid maniac settlers who are the ones raving around, mobbing around and murdering and pillaging that everyone seems to have talked about. That was the ones they were going to sanction and then didn't because they got threatened. Democracy. But the point is that they're now getting bombed and attacked by Lebanon, which, by the way, has a legal right to resist because they're occupied. And the point is the ones they're bombing are illegal settlements to begin with and acting like they're the victims all of a sudden, as usual. And the point is that they're talking about seceding, like pulling away from Israel. So talk about the divided entity right now where and we're going to get to the ceasefire talk, where you've got Netanyahu and some people on his side. You've got the Smotrich and Ben Gvir side of this that are talking that they'll disband the government and break away and, all this different stuff. If he accepts the deal, you've got settlers saying they're going to break away if they don't stop. It's crazy. And my point is, as before, and a lot of people have been saying that this is the reality of what they are. Like, they're not organized. They are not disciplined. And you can see that by the fact that their people are posting videos on TikTok and Instagram of openly committing crimes. I don't believe that they would allow that if this was under their control. But it says Israel is sacrificing its own people, which we'll talk about today, Hannibal Directive, ruining its economy, and had destroyed any international sympathy it had from the October 7th attack. They ruined that within the first week. And I made that point many times. Had they gone to the UN and gone through the right channels, they would have never had to ask for support ever again. But of course, to them, that's bowing to other powers, and that's not how the Zionist maniacal entity thinks. So they acted irrationally and assumed that the people would bow to what they wanted. And they woke up too many average people in doing it, in my opinion. And then you got opportunists and profiteers that are recognizing that Israel's lost that support, and so have they. And if we support Israel to the end, we'll lose everything. And so it's easy to see how even the dishonest people are beginning to lean, go with the momentum. But But it says Biden used to say Hamas will be destroyed. Now he's calling for it to sign a ceasefire with Israel. Netanyahu and his backers still insist they're on the way to victory. Israel's greatest supporters are driving it to collapse, like Nikki Haley. Now, before we go into the bigger discussion of ceasefire, I find this to be very relevant to the way this is going. Elijah Monnier pointed this out. This was from yesterday. Hezbollah from Lebanon bombed the Syrian-occupied Golan Heights. Now, this is occupied by Israel. You realize, and of course, this was given to him illegally by Trump. It's literally called in some of these locations Trump Heights. It's just embarrassing. It's shockingly illegal. Same with allowing them to control Jerusalem. It's all of those were unilateral and illegal. But that's typical for Trump for you. And it says, and surrounding areas, causing fires and sending more than 100,000 Israelis into shelters. Right. These are illegally occupied areas of Syria, right? Not even talking about Israel, Palestine, Gaza. And the reality here is that this is because they have been bombing, and we'll get to the white phosphorus element, where Israel's using white phosphorus right now, as it has many times in Lebanon, burning their fields and important, and so they respond. That's what happens. And to frame this as anything other than a legal response, whether you're talking about the fact that they bombed anything with regard to Israel, or the fact that they are actually bombing illegal settlements because they are occupied, every angle of this, Lebanon is acting in legal aspect. Obviously, Israel is not, with their illegal occupations and bombing of civilians and so on. I mean, it's obvious. And it's not about taking one side. This is the reality of the law. And the point is that Hezbollah and the rest, it says, of the AOR have stepped up the destruction because of that response, with Israel rejecting the ceasefire. Now, it says Israel tries to impose a new rule of engagement on Hezbollah. It says, you own a drone and we hit the Bekaa Valley. Hezbollah responds, nope, you hit the Bekaa, the valley, and we destroy multiple advanced barracks in the Golan Heights. Israel kills civilians in Lebanon, which it did. Hezbollah bombs military targets close to different locations in occupied Palestine. Israel uses phosphorus bombs, we'll talk about later in the show, and burns forests. Hezbollah responds equally with some of the bombs and burns settlers' agricultural fields. Simple, right? And again, these are the idea that Israel is screaming about self-defense when in no way you could even remotely claim they're defending themselves at this point. And here's a good example of what it actually looks like. Calculated, balanced response in tactical military locations, not civilians, as Israel then responds by killing civilians, because that's what they know. Not every Israeli or Jew, but Israel's government. It's shocking we have to keep making that point. But here's the important part of this. So here you go. You have Hezbollah bombing these locations. And this was just to keep that in your mind, the idea that a lot of this is overlapping with Syria. Don't forget, Israel has been bombing Syria every other day whenever they want to for a long time now. And this has been even openly acknowledged by corporate media. And Russia doesn't even, sometimes intervenes a little bit, but usually doesn't even respond, neither does Syria, which shows you not only restraint, but that they're not the belligerent, maniacal things that they always frame them as, at least in the context of the way they respond militarily. It's almost always they show a level of restraint, and because they understand if they respond in a big way, they'll turn right around and say, they attacked us and we're defending, and just like they're doing everywhere else. See, so realize that suddenly Syria becomes an important front to the war for Israel and their occupied elements. The Golan Heights are very important for the control over the Syrian area, but also because it's sort of a heightened altitude, and it's easy for them to bomb down in different directions, but it also has a hell of a lot of resources, in particular water, which is very important to Syria, which is one of the reasons they took it, but for Israel as well. And so my point is that all of a sudden you see why they might be needing to deploy there. More so, I would argue. My point, though, is that they're engaged with Lebanon, with Gaza, with Hamas, with all sorts of different things. So what do? Well, they call on their lackeys. They call on their proxy army and say, hey, Azov Nazis, we need you over here. Now, this is my opinion. This is completely theorizing, but realize whatever the reasoning or the action or the choice that was taken, that is what's happening. Now we're being reports from I-24 News telling you that Ukraine is now fighting with moderate rebels. We're still playing that game. That's not a joke, by the way. That's actually what's being reported from the Kiev Post. Ukrainian special forces and Syrian rebels. Like we don't remember as our own government. We're like, yeah, you got us. Those are terrorists. Yeah, that's the reality, guys. We're talking about Hayat al-Sham, like extreme, the people that were literally shown to be chopping children's heads off, like actually doing that and using actual human shields. that your government, that Obama was forced to admit, and so too since then, your government was supporting. Terrorists, extremists, just like the clip we started with. And now, weirdly enough, you got Ukraine going over and working with the worst of the worst. Why? Because they're the same elements, guys. These are the extremist elements that we've talked about, that they have funded. Why? Because the moderate elements in these locations didn't want to bow to the interests that they wanted, U.S. and Israel. So what do? They find the extremist elements that will take money and do whatever, and they go, here, we'll fund the moderate rebels against the ones that are actually willing to have a discussion on diplomacy and democracy and fight for human rights. But no, we don't like those people, even though let's pretend that's what they're fighting for in the world. So let's watch this clip just so you can see this from the Israeli media talking about the idea that this is happening, that Ukraine is now deployed into Syria. And that shouldn't be that shocking when you understand the full picture. And we'll go through more details in a second.
This, according to a Ukrainian newspaper today, they are fighting in Syria. Is this a bid by Kyiv to stop Moscow from expanding its influence in the region? Is this new?
Well, the idea that that there could be such potential fighting is not necessarily new. Certainly, when it comes to Sudan, Washington Post reported last year that there were plans that Zelensky ultimately canceled. So there's still a lot we don't know with regard to this report from Kyiv Post that came out, but certainly it's an important report. What matters, again, is that we see how many connections there are specifically to the Middle East when it comes to Ukraine. And really, the Middle East has become this battlefield precisely because Russia, for its part, sees this war as a global contest.
See, it's just embarrassing. Now, of course that's possible. Of course it's possible that behind all of this, Russia's, twisting its mustache, going, oh, I can't wait to take over the world when this all stops. But there's literally nothing but their opinion that makes that make sense. Not their actions, not their statements. I mean, and then while they're saying that, you can prove in about 14 different ways that the Azov movement explicitly states that they will do that. Once they're done with Russia, they'll spread the white race around the world and occupy. They've said this many times. That's a direct quote. Then you've got Israel with their Greater Israel plan that takes Jordan, takes Egypt, takes Syria, and have said this is their plan. There was a settler just screaming about how that's the plan. And I mean like a prominent element that's been official, that's given status by Israel. And we're supposed to look around and point to their enemies that don't say that have actions that don't prove that, and go, they're the one. It's just embarrassing.
And when it comes to countering Russia in Ukraine, we now see how important it is to counter Russia in the Middle East.
In the Middle East, right? Because Russia is in the Middle East, right? Other than protecting Syria. I mean, there's obviously overlap and agreements, diplomacy, like a lot of these large countries have with everybody in the world for the most part. But to frame them as the one that they're battling in the Middle East, it is meant to try to divert attention to the person that they want you to see as the enemy. Ukraine and Russia expand the battlefield to the Middle East. That's how they frame that, as it is reported that Ukrainian forces are operating in the Golan Heights. Okay. So Ukraine and Russia expand the battlefield. Russia has an ally with Syria, and they've been defending Syria, not discernibly taking over anything, as far as I can tell, backing Assad against the authoritarian occupying forces seeking his destruction by lying about everything, which is easy to prove. We can go back to the very early point, to Carlo Del Ponte from the UN acknowledging that the rebels used the chemical weapons, or the fact that Robert Fisk or any number, or Aaron Mate, for example, breaking these things down from every angle, proving that it was in fact a lie that they used them, or it was actually the rebels and not Assad. This is all about trying to create this into some Russian concept. But the point is, what do we have? We have Ukrainian forces in Syria. That's not because of Russia, you guys. Russia's been there. This is because I think there's a lot bigger action happening in regard to Israel. So here's the Kyiv Post as well. Ukrainian special forces and Syrian rebels decimate Russian mercenaries in Syria, which, that's of course the way they're framing this. The reality seems to be that they're just there in the interest of U.S. and Israel, as far as I can tell. Now, realizing this is not new. This is in regard to Gaza. So the reality that these elements have already been shifted around like pieces on a board long ago. This was from December 20th, 2023. And this was a guy from the Azov movement, literally signing the chalkboard in Gaza that they've destroyed and saying, "Hey, Mom, I'm in Israel." That's what that says. And the point was Azov and Gaza. We cover this very clearly. So you have Azov movement elements from Ukraine already pulled over by Israel to work in Gaza. Now, if that seems confusing to you, make sure you remember that this goes back a long way, long before 2018. But here is Haaretz. The title, Rights Groups Demand Israel Stop Arming Neo-Nazis. That shouldn't be confusing if you understand the bigger picture. I'll include this as well. The conversation of how Zionism had aligned itself with Nazi Germany before and during and after the final solution, which if you don't understand that, it's because they've lied about what's really going on here. Dan Cohen has covered this as well. And we discussed a lot of things in this discussion. But the point is, it's very easy to see. The fact that Zionist elements were willing to sacrifice Jews in Arab countries, the CIA has discussed, or on their own documents, because it wasn't really about Judaism, it was about fascism and power. But here it is, 2018. More than 40 human rights activists have filed a petition demanding the cessation of Israel arm exports to Ukraine. And who are we talking about? The Azov movement. That's what we're talking about. And they're an openly neo-Nazi group, and they were acknowledging it. That the point is they're funding these elements, like the United States. So to find them in Gaza or in Syria, it's obvious what's happening, in my opinion. Now, we also discussed in the past many times the idea of Operation Aerodynamic or Project Aerodynamic. And as I've titled in this discussion, not just Azov, documents prove the CIA has been cultivating fascism in Ukraine since at least 1948. So we could, and this is, I think, the same dynamic, the same manipulation. Now, last thing I'll put on this segment, because I just want to include this, was that the overlap with January 6th. This show is entitled January 6th was always a very clear government operation. And just this opening image makes it very clear. And all the source material, as always, for you guys to check out is down there. The point is that on that day, here is Sergei Beninian, or now I'm blanking. I haven't talked about it in a minute. I forget. It's all the information all down below. But this guy here, Sergei is his name. He is standing next to Jake Chansley in this image at January 6th. The point is, as we've proven, and you guys have likely already seen, here he is, and many more. This is not just based on the image. The source material is down below. He is an Azov movement member. For the podcast, he's there with his military uniform on, with the flag next to him. He's part of the Azov movement. The point there is that he was there at January 6th. Guess what he's screaming? "Let's go into the building," in Russian. There was a reason that was happening. And we broke this down many times. And don't forget that you also have the members of the left groups that were screaming, "We got him, we tricked him, we did it," as they were trying to get people to go in the building. This was an operation, guys. And the point is that I think a huge part of it that fell flat was that they were trying to frame this as a Russian manipulation using elements like neo-Nazis, because the whole game, as Whitney and I have discussed many times, was to frame Russia for being the one creating the neo-Nazis. That's imploded. Now they just are fixed to just pretend they're not neo-Nazis anymore. That's how flimsy these are. But over this is about using these elements, whether it's Afghanistan, Gaza, Ukraine, Syria, or the United States. That's my whole point about them seeding these things. And as they're screaming about the Hamas members and what they'll do in this country, we need to realize who's actually doing this. Even the funding of Hamas themselves, Israel. We need to see the bigger picture and how they use these elements and frame anybody else they want. So I think that's a very important part of this. So bringing that into the conversation of the ceasefire, right? As we're talking about groups they've manipulated and just the flat dishonesty of everything that they do, this is a very important point in this. The reality that the Israeli government has been caught more than once pretending they want to do this. And their own people, clearly more than the United States, have seen this. They're protesting. They're screaming. The people are bursting into the chambers. They're protesting from their houses. They're burning things down in the streets. They want him to take the deal to take the people back. And as far as I could tell, we'll do it right now. They're straight up saying no. So we just covered this yesterday. Israel once again refused its own ceasefire deal after Hamas accepts. Good. It's important. We broke this down in shorter than usual. And again, going back to May 7th, Robert wrote this as well. Hamas agrees to ceasefire. Israel attacks Rafah in response. The same thing happened here. It got a little bit less attention. Obviously now more because it's just that flagrant. The point was Israel offered a deal. Blinken stood up and said, Hamas better take it. Israel gave them everything. Hamas says, we take it. Israel goes, that's not true. We didn't do that. And they start bombing Rafah. And successfully, to a large degree, diverted the conversation by committing genocide, even, continuing their genocide. But now, again, the point is it just happened again. So starting, importantly, which is one thing I read today on the final countdown, this is an article from today from Times of Israel. Now, we're going to highlight Israeli media to make this point very clear. Here's the title. Blinken presses Gantz, respectively, on hostage deal proposal. Proposal, we're calling it now, a proposal, despite the fact that it's been proposed and accepted. Now it's back to proposal. Now the onus is back on Hamas, which is what they're saying. How does that possibly make sense? Well, let me prove to you that even the Israeli media is making this very, very clear. So it says, top U.S. diplomat vows deal would advance Israel's long-term security interest. War cabinet discusses post-war Gaza governance as diaspora affairs ministry slams proposal as joke. Right, so it's on Hamas, but they're calling it a joke? Yeah, first and foremost, realize that it's fractured, as we already highlighted. But I think it's shockingly clear right now that you can see that the Israeli government is split and shattered and fractured with their different opinions. It's chaos because they're not disciplined and they're out there. These are extremist people all fighting for their own interest, including Netanyahu. But this is the important part. It says, we'll start with the whole thing. It says the deal, Biden said, would the same thing, would bring all the hostages home and ensure their security. And it says, the Times of Israel writes, while Israeli officials have, and this is today, guys, confirmed that the offer publicly laid out by Biden on Friday was, in fact, the proposal Jerusalem submitted. Israeli leaders have asserted that the war will continue until Hamas has been destroyed. And large sections of the government have criticized Biden for failing to provide clarity on how that would be achieved. Okay, try to make sense of that. Israeli officials have confirmed that what they put forward, that Hamas has accepted, was their proposal. Okay, and Hamas said yes. And they're like, but wait, you haven't made clear how we're going to make this happen? This is a game. And anyone pretending this is somehow complicated are lying to you. They offered, they bluffed, Hamas called their bluff, and now they're pretending like something else is happening. It's pretty damn simple. And I know a lot of people out there have made that statement. It's very clear. But it's amazing to me, the high-level people that are pretending like this is super complicated. Here is Haaretz. It says, and this is the title, and this is the older archive title. I'll show you after I read the new title is, because it gets even more specific. It says, yes to the Israeli proposal to end the war in Gaza. This is from Haaretz. Now, it reads, in the speech that U.S. President Joe Biden delivered last Friday night, he said that Israel had made Hamas a new proposal that serves as a, quote, roadmap to an enduring ceasefire and the release of all hostages. Which, by the way, is the whole point that I made yesterday briefly. That now you'll see my point is why I made it yesterday is that they're now debating the nuance of, well, was it a full ceasefire? Was it about removing all the troops? Was it only a temporary ceasefire? And this was my point. Well, Biden clearly laid out what his graphic showed, which was a full ceasefire. But this is the point, and that included what Jerusalem had agreed to. I think it's very clear they just didn't expect Hamas to say yes, based on other things they included. But it says, Biden emphasized again and again in his address that it was an Israeli proposal. Now, of course, we could point out or argue that Biden is saying that because he was hoping he would trick them into taking it. Frankly, I don't think that they're have that much foresight. I think the Israeli U.S. government has been showing themselves to be completely inept in this conversation, and Biden can't even tie his own shoes. So I don't understand why. I mean, it's certainly possible. But then you combine that with the fact that today they've already admitted, yes, that was our proposal. I think this is about trying to hide the truth. And at the time, I think Biden thought, well, they accepted it and they offered it, so we'll say it's an Israeli proposal because that was the truth. But it says Hamas, and by the way, I'll add too that I think Biden, outside of all of the political dynamics as their cabinet, they recognize that they want this to happen for his benefit in the election, regardless of every other agenda. And I think that's playing a factor. But it says Hamas responded quickly and positively to the president's remarks, but Israel related to it as an American proposal, not an Israeli one, which would have to be answered either positively or negatively. This was reflected in the prime minister's responses, which grew cooler and cooler with each new formulation in anticipation of opposition from the extreme right ministers and their threats to withdraw from the government. Withdraw from the government, but also apparently try to bring it down is what they've made. They said, I'll show you in a minute. It says this strange dynamic can be explained by the government's split political personality, which has been present throughout the months of the war and prevents it from holding a discussion on the day after in Gaza or from seeking an end to the war. So even right now, as you're beginning to see, even Haaretz is framing this as Israel, right? They're scattered and manipulative conversations, like the fact that they're different. I think it's, let me just, you'll see my point when I keep reading. It says, we cannot allow the government, this is Haaretz speaking, we cannot allow the government, that is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the war cabinet, that is all the people we're talking about, we can't allow them to distance itself from the plan presented by Biden. His proposal represents the Israeli position, the one discussed behind closed doors, out of earshot of threats by the extreme right, meaning Smotrich and Gavir and their Jewish power party and this is religious Zionism party, like the extreme absolute Zionist maniacs, based on, by the way, that even the ADL and other groups in the past have called them extreme. And this is Haaretz, by the way, Israeli platform calling them extreme right. It says, in the proposal, Israel recognizes the necessity of stopping the war and is ready for it. Now, I think they're generally talking about the Israeli people. And that's important to hear for Americans, that the people of Israel, whether they care about Palestinians or not, are near ubiquitously at this point calling for them to take this deal. You're not going to hear that in the Western media or from the government, any of the people in this country, other than independent media, the real independent media, not the mainstream alternative media. But what they're highlighting there is that this is the Israeli position, and that what they did is that Netanyahu and their as they said, Jerusalem's proposal made the agreement with the U.S. because that's how this goes. They're discussing this. They agree. They send it to Hamas because Hamas is not in the room. They send it to Qatar with the other leaders of Hamas that Israel allows to be safe in Qatar, and they accept it. So then you get the Ben Gavirs and the Smotrich, the most extreme lunatics of the conversation, and they then get wind of it because they're not included, and they freak out, and this causes this conversation to happen. So maybe something big happened when Netanyahu got scared, and he responded by saying, no, never mind, it's not real. Whatever. We don't know. It doesn't even matter why they decided to mix this up. The clear part is they offered it, Hamas accepted, then they're pretending like it wasn't happening. It says the Israeli proposal presented by Biden and to which Hamas responded positively is the only hope of bringing back the hostages and ending the war. That's Haaretz saying that. Quote, we can't lose this moment. Indefinite war in pursuit of an unidentified notion of total victory will only bog down Israel and Gaza. Do you remember who posted that? We showed you yesterday, Aviva Klampus. She highlighted everything Biden said and leaned into it, said, here is the proposal from Biden, which, by the way, that was my point at the time when it first came out. It didn't say permanent ceasefire. But either way, that same people who acted like this is great, Hamas better do it, have shifted to going, we can't deal with Hamas, they're firing rockets, which just shows you how shockingly dishonest all of these Zionist screamers on Twitter are. They were the ones saying they should take it. Then they did. And their narrative is, why would we deal with Hamas? Well, you were just asking everybody to. It's very embarrassing for them, I'm sure. It says the one thing that is preventing Netanyahu from, quote, accepting the Israeli proposal, it's ridiculous, is the desire to preserve his coalition and continue rule. And his continued rule. That's his Haaretz mainstream corporate Israeli media highlighting that he's using this dynamic to maintain power, which, by the way, I've said for years that Israeli media has told the public. They'll pretend rockets were fired. They'll fire rockets, engage with Gaza, kill civilians just to get a little political benefit. It's very public conversation in Israel. And if you say it over here in this country, you're racist. The point is, how do you, and that's why they put it in quotes. I mean, Haaretz is making a very clear point here. The one thing that's preventing Netanyahu from accepting the Israeli proposal, that's ridiculous. If they proposed it and Hamas accepted, why are we going, will Israel accept? They already offered it. This is an absurd game of semantics or manipulation. And it says Ben Gavir and Smotrich and a handful of Likud extremists, which Netanyahu's party, by the way, prefer to keep fighting and are ready to sacrifice the living hostages to do so. That's what Haaretz wrote about their leading elements of their government, guys. And here we are screaming the opposite by people that are in this country that have no idea what's actually going on or don't care to find out. They're willing to sacrifice the hostages to get what they want. How long have we been saying this? It's one of the most obvious elements of this because they did so on October 7th. Hannibal Directive. And we're going to get to that point today with these new hostages they pretend they just found, even though we know they were killed by bombings a while ago, like the Bibas family. They keep using these things. And of course, it's important to highlight that the child, especially, who was taken by Hamas, that's an egregious crime. They broke the law by taking that child, and they should be accountable for that. But so too should the Israeli government for indiscriminately, if not deliberately, targeting them with these bombs, which killed them, as his father made clear. Or in this case, hostages that have already been shown to have been killed by Israeli bombings and are now being used. And there's another one, by the way, they claim they just identified after 9 months. We'll get to it in a minute. A body that was in October 7th that they say they only just now identified. I don't buy it. I think that's absurd. And the idea being that I think they just are slowly trickling these numbers out to make it seem like something changed, when in reality, another person they killed on October 7th. But it ends by saying there are not many opportunities remaining to do the right thing. Haaretz ends by saying, and put an end to the nightmare that began 8 months ago. The nightmare. This is mainstream Israeli media highlighting what they're doing as a nightmare. Think about that compared to what we're being told Israel thinks from the Western media. They're not calling it a nightmare because they're worried about the hostages. I mean, there's a part of that. They're calling it a nightmare because what's happening is ridiculous. This isn't defense. This is slaughter. This is genocide. History will remember it that way no matter what they do. And it says Biden has put one such opportunity on the table. We must take it. But I think even that is insulting because you don't take something you offered. But that's kind of the point that they're making. Now, this is what it says now. This is the updated title for the same article. Israel must accept its own proposal to free hostages and stop the war. How obvious is that? How clear is that statement? Israel must accept its own proposal. This is a joke. This is how stupid that they think you are. But even more so, this is how stupid Matt Miller thinks you are. This is how stupid Biden and Blinken and your government actually think we are. Because they're pretending this is not the case. Even as their media highlights this. Here's June 3rd. This is today. Quote, if Hamas agrees to the offer, which they already did, Netanyahu has no exit route. He can't say no. So this is where we are all of a sudden, where they propose it, Hamas accepts, and now they're going, well, Hamas has to accept again. And here's where it's going to get even more ridiculous as we get into Matt Miller highlighting that they're nearly identical. So the game is still going as they kill people today, as we'll go into at Jabalya refugee camp, al-Nusrat. They are killing children as we speak, as your government pretends like there's some kind of nuance happening here. And here, as of today, is what Netanyahu is saying. Right, literally, while Matt Miller is pretending like they're playing ball and it's only Hamas that's stopping all of this, Netanyahu disputes Joe Biden over permanent ceasefire plan. Quote, what the U.S. president described is not accurate. Suddenly, that's where we are. This is from NBC. Biden's description of ceasefire not accurate, says Israel. Here's what they wrote. It says the officials specifically disputed that Israel had agreed to fully withdraw its troops. This is important to what I said yesterday. The reason is because there was a nuance. There was a manipulation going on where they were highlighting. And this is where you might be able to argue that the U.S. played it fast and loose with what they said Israel accepted. That's certainly possible. Either way, Jerusalem and the United States agreed to what they gave to Hamas. Now, right there, is it possible that the U.S. decided to change something? It's certainly possible. I kind of don't think that's what happened. But either way, remember that people like Aviva Klompas and the rest of them were highlighting that it was a 6-week ceasefire that had path to longer, which is kind of a ridiculous thing to say when you know that's not going to be the case when they're saying we won't stop till Hamas is gone. Either way, so it's saying that they agreed, not that they disputed that the full withdrawal was that was not part of the deal, and to free the 125 hostages. The point is that they want, and they've said this many times, they want everything, and then they'll do their part. Does anybody pretend that's going to work out? No matter what side you're on or what you believe is right, you're in a negotiation, you both agree to something, and they go, no, you have to do it all first, and then we'll do our part. They're going to go, rocket flew, they broke it after they get everything they want. That's guaranteed to happen in my mind. And I realized that once they give up all the hostages, they have no reason to maintain, and even if 6 weeks or forever, they're just going to go right back to what they're doing because they have no leverage. But I hope they give them up. I just hope that we end this in a way that is actually not going to continue the killing of innocent Palestinians, because that should matter just as much as the hostages, shouldn't it? Human life and all. But it says, quote, Israel has not changed its conditions to reach a permanent ceasefire. That will only happen after our objectives are met, including destroying Hamas's military and government capability. Okay, that's as clear as it gets, and this is why we keep pointing to it. Every day since the beginning of October 7th forward, they've said, we will not stop until Hamas is destroyed. And even remember, as we covered in the beginning, they said more than once, hostages were secondary. Now, they don't say that anymore today because it's angering all their people. And I don't think people in Israel even saw that when they were saying that to a Western audience in the beginning. In any case, that's the clear reality from Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. Even to this day, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir are saying that they have to wait. They've said this to the faces of hostages' families, and they freak out and rush the cabinet. We've talked about this. But they say, we have to destroy Hamas first. Our agenda is more important than your families. So they're saying, nothing has changed. We will not do anything that's on that list until we think Hamas is gone. Even then, we've already proven that they've mentioned Palestinian Islamic Jihad and plenty of others. So why would we pretend it's going to end there either? But how does that make sense with the proposed deal? Because they didn't think Hamas would take it. It says the official also said that while the White House described the plan as originating from Israel, it was actually a proposal put forward by mediators to which Israel had made amendments and changes. Okay, so what are you suggesting? That you made your changes and they didn't include those? Based on the way you just said that, that sounds like you made changes that was sent to Hamas and they accepted. What am I missing? It says, it's strange that they say it's an Israeli proposal and at the same time that Israel needs to agree to it. Well, yeah, I also think that's stupid because the whole point is that's what they're saying after you refuse because they don't know what else to do. So it's, perfect example of how the Israeli propaganda machine loses. I don't know what, I've said this many times. I don't know how in the world people have fallen for this in the past if they're really this bad at this. But for you to come out and highlight that very dynamic, this is the idea. You're shooting yourself in the foot to try to make the point you think will benefit you in the immediate moment, sacrificing the larger agenda. No foresight. By acknowledging that they're telling you to agree to it, you're proving that there's a lie going on there. But see, it's only about making sure the Israeli agenda works, maybe just for one more moment. But he says the official added that Israel was awaiting Hamas's formal response to the proposal. And that makes the point complete. So you know they've accepted this. You're saying, I'm confused why we need to agree to it. Okay, that's exactly what I'm saying. And that you're waiting for Hamas to accept it? No one in the world is saying that. That is a losing argument because you're just making things exactly what Israel does. Hamas already accepted it. That's the reality. For them to say now we're waiting for them, this is what's spinning people like Matt Miller and the rest. They're lost. Are they waiting for Israel or waiting for Hamas? Is the proposal the same? Are they confused? They're just hoping everyone gets so confused they give up on the conversation. It's working for some. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby, after everything we just read, reiterated today that the ceasefire proposal was put forward by Israel. Now we're seeing a split between Israel and the United States. This could genuinely cause more of a rift because this is not some small thing. You got Kirby and the rest of the United States standing strong and saying, no, you put this forward. Matt Miller's lying about it in public, but you got people like Kirby going, no, it was Israel that did it. It says, quote, the Israeli foreign minister himself acknowledged that this was the Israeli proposal. Okay, you don't need to see anything else right there. We will go into more, but that alone, when you got Kirby and the U.S. government saying that their foreign ministry of Israel acknowledged and said, yes, that's our proposal. So what that either shows you is that there's that much of a divide, a split between what Israel's doing, between Netanyahu, their foreign ministry, and their extreme cabinet members. That's clearly one of the most likely possibilities, that they're just arguing and they don't know what to accept and who to listen to, which shows you they're not really even a functioning government, or they made this entire thing up to hide the fact that their bluff got called. Those are the only two things that really make sense to me. Now, Lens Veritas highlights today Netanyahu, and I think driven by the interest of the extreme members of his cabinet, have come out in the last hour and said basically that he rejects this. And he says primarily the elimination of Hamas has to come first. As he writes, in the last hour, Netanyahu appears to have rejected the Biden announced proposal, instead reasserting the elimination of Hamas is our primary goal. If that's your primary goal and nothing happens before that, well, that answers every question. So they can't keep pretending like Hamas refuses a ceasefire if you keep saying that we won't even accept anything until Hamas is gone. How does that possibly make sense to anybody with a brain? If Hamas is gone, how can they accept a ceasefire? It's lunacy that people are pretending like this is not the most obvious deception in history. Now, this is from today, from MSN.com. Blinken calls up Israeli officials to discuss Gaza plan. Again, says onus is on Hamas to accept the deal. Guys, this should be a cartoon. We should be laughing about this. Do you mean the deal they accepted that you're just pretending didn't happen because Israel called it? I mean, it's embarrassing. And the main part here, it says, well, I think there was a couple things above this. Basically, it just says they've spoken with Gallant and Gantz about this whole thing. Gantz, it says in separate calls, and this is what's so hilarious about it. Matt Miller and Blinken have both commended Israel for the proposal. The proposal that they're right now saying isn't theirs and you're lying about it. Have fun with that. And it says, and emphasize that the onus was on Hamas to accept the deal that they've already accepted. I mean, guys, this is a sitcom. This is ridiculous. The U.S. Secretary reiterated that in addition to reuniting hostages with their loved ones, before Israel kills them, of course, the proposal would advance Israel's long-term security interests, including by unlocking the possibility of calm along Israel's border with Lebanon. Hardly. Yeah, weird that there's no mention of the Gaza families being murdered right now. But it's all about Israel's interests. But top U.S. diplomat commended Israel's readiness to conclude a deal and reaffirmed the United States' ironclad commitment to Israel. Right, so you commend their readiness to conclude the deal that they just refused to conclude? Yep. On Friday, U.S. President Joe Biden announced in a speech that Israel has proposed a comprehensive new proposal. This is what we're talking about. That provides a roadmap to the ceasefire that they've refused. According to Biden, the proposal transmitted by Qatar to Hamas outlines a roadmap towards a ceasefire. The initial phase, and this is the interesting part, this is what I was talking about. The initial phase, spanning 6 weeks, involves a full and complete ceasefire with the withdrawal of Israeli forces. Now, this is the game. I don't think I made this as clear as I could have yesterday. They're calling it a complete ceasefire. But if you can argue it only lasts 6 weeks, is that a complete ceasefire? Is the argument that it's a complete ceasefire for 6 weeks, like the game with the whole pause versus ceasefire they've done many times? Is that how Israel is reading it? You see my point? Because this is how they framed it, and many people online and many of the Israeli officials were highlighting before this was refused by Israel, or rather pretending Hamas did, that this was temporary. And this may be the idea of what they're trying to create to act like there was confusion. But it says, and release a number of hostages. The announcement follows Israel's presentation of new ideas regarding hostage and ceasefire negotiations earlier in the week. Right. That Israel put this forward, they sent it. Direct talks between Israel and Hamas regarding the release of hostages were paused 3 weeks ago due to disagreements over terms. The statement from the group said that it had shown flexibility and positivity in dealing with the efforts of the mediators throughout all the previous rounds of the indirect negotiations. Israel, Hamas said, had used the months of ongoing talks as a cover to continue its war in Gaza. Well, that's obvious. But realize that we're talking about the mediators. These are Israeli representatives. And many times leading officials that are involved in this conversation that Netanyahu and the rest of them have to sign off on. The White House National Security Council spokesman Kirby said on Sunday, the U.S. expects Israel to stick to the hostage deal proposal it made last week and accept the offer if Hamas consents as well. I'm honestly not even sure why Kirby seems to be holding to this, but it's important because you're he proving that they're lying. It says, we have every expectation that if Hamas agrees to the proposal, you realize this is today, as was transmitted to them, rather than reporting today, but this is Kirby saying this, an Israeli proposal that Israel would say yes. Now, how does this possibly make sense? So, an Israeli proposal. So what I'm saying is that this is Kirby already setting this up before it was sent to act like Israel had to confirm after they've already confirmed it. I think they just gave them a secondary out. So they present the plan, Hamas accepts, and they're going, well, we have to wait to Israel to accept again. None of this is honest, as you can very clearly see. Now, here's Matt Miller today. This is what he's actually saying after everything we just highlighted. This is what he's framing it as.
President's remarks on Friday, Secretary Blinken has been engaging in intense diplomacy with foreign counterparts to urge the completion of an agreement for a ceasefire in Gaza that would secure the release of hostages and set the stage for lasting peace. Over that time, the Secretary has spoken to the foreign ministers of Turkey, Egypt, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates, as well as Israeli Defense Minister Gallant and War Cabinet member Benny Gantz. In all of his calls, the Secretary has underscored the benefits of this proposal to both Israelis and Palestinians. For Palestinians, a ceasefire would see an end to the daily death toll in Gaza, an end to the destruction that has torn so many families apart and robbed children, women, men of their lives and their futures. It would allow hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to begin returning to their neighborhoods as the international community surges humanitarian assistance into Gaza and launches a major reconstruction effort.
Which Israel won't allow, and realize they are actively taking and literally occupying more than just legally, boots on the ground, more areas within. This is being, they now have a buffer zone around all of the outside of the area and a major zone going right through the middle of it, which they have no intention of giving back. And we're going to pretend like they're going to let them all go back to these areas. By the way, they have nowhere to go back to. They've destroyed near every part of the infrastructure, almost every home, rubble blown apart, destroyed. No, what? I mean, they're going to go back to what? Now, this is the idea of the reconstruction that I guarantee they're going to benefit Israel, pay them to do something that will only benefit Israel in the first place.
For Israelis, too, this proposal offers a path to a better future. It would bring home the hostages who have now been separated from their loved ones for 240 days. It would unlock the possibility of calm along Israel's border with Lebanon, where we saw continued terrorist attacks by Hezbollah just today.
What do you mean unlock the possibility? Like, so this deal then opens that possibility? Like, the idea of, it's just a weird way to frame that. And of course, framing it as terrorists when all you're talking about is an occupied entity legally responding. But of course, only Israel can respond forever. They're defending themselves forever for the rest of their lives. Anybody else that actually legally responds is immediately terrorism. That's just Israel propaganda right there.
So the tens of thousands of Israelis who have been displaced from their homes for the past 8 months could finally return home.
So no mention of the millions of displaced people in Gaza, not even they can just return home. But the idea that we're highlighting the fact that Israelis have been displaced from illegal settlements, you can't even mention that. The United States has acknowledged are illegal. But now we're fighting to help them return to those illegal settlements? What he just said.
And it would set the conditions to finally realize the strategic realignment which Israel has long sought, improved relations with its Arab neighbors, and the isolation of Iran and the terrorist groups it funds.
Right, so your peace deal includes attacking Iran and isolating Iran. I mean, it's just embarrassing. These guys are warmongers in every way. Even their peace deal includes war.
This is the possibility that exists for Israelis and Palestinians today. As the United States said in a joint statement on Saturday with Egypt and Qatar, this proposal will bring immediate relief to both the long-suffering people of Gaza and the long-suffering hostages and their families. It offers a roadmap for a permanent ceasefire and an end to the crisis.
Well, see, this is my point. A roadmap to a ceasefire is not the same thing as a ceasefire. That's pretty obvious. So if there's any opening for that roadmap to be, delayed, stopped entirely, redrawn, Israel will take it. And anybody actually familiar with the history is what they've done every single time. And I just played a clip of Chomsky saying the same thing. That's what they do.
The world should know, the Palestinian people should know, that the only thing standing in the way of an immediate ceasefire today is Hamas.
This is June 30 said that, or at the very least yesterday. I believe this was today. But my point is, at a time when it's verifiable that Hamas has already accepted that deal and Israel pulled back. And even Israel saying, and that people are saying Israel has to accept it now. But how in the world are we waiting for Hamas to accept something if Israel's accepting it too? Or the idea that Hamas has already accepted that deal. These people are monsters. You're literally making something as simple as can be complicated to make sure you can make Israel not look like they just denied and refused everything, and meanwhile continuing to kill children. That's why they were chanting in front of his house. Not that exact thing, but in general, how many children have you killed today, Matt Miller? Because these people are allowing that to continue while pretending they're fighting for the thing that will stop it.
The proposal on the table is nearly identical to what Hamas said it would accept just a few weeks ago.
Okay. They've accepted it, man. This has been accepted. They're lying to you.
And it is now time for them to act. It is time for them to accept the deal. It is time to finalize this agreement and put an end to the suffering of Israelis and Palestinians alike.
I mean, how infuriating. How infuriating for them to pretend. And by the way, Instagram has yet again deleted our stream. Just don't point out every day. It's ongoing, literally every time they seem to block us now. How infuriating it is to watch them pretend like this is now back on Hamas. So let me ask you this. If Hamas stands up today and says, we accept, do you think that will end? I bet you that's where this will go, because Israel will be forced to say no again. And that was what the Haaretz article was saying. That basically, if they say yes again, well, he has no way to say, they'll just pretend they lied again. This has happened. It'll be the fourth time. Why do we think it'll be any different? Now, here is another clip from today. Matt Lee grilling him on the same point. And this is where we get into the nearly identical thing, which is just, I mean, when you've got all of them in that room, usually, now I don't, other than, in my opinion, Matt Lee, Saeed Erekat, Sam Husseini, and a couple of others, most of them are just lackeys doing what they're supposed to. My point, though, is that usually in that room, you don't get the kind of pushback we're seeing constantly right now, because it's this ridiculous, this embarrassing. So Matt Lee calls him out.
That Hamas just a few weeks ago signed off on a virtually identical proposal.
But you just spoke to the points of why this would be wonderful for Israel. And, there's the way you've approached this so far is that Hamas, the way a lot of people have approached is that Hamas doesn't care about the Palestinian people. They only care about themselves. And so there are, in a sense, three parties to this: Israel, the Palestinian people, non-Hamas, and Hamas. So, but I think the answer to my question, which is what's in it for Hamas, is essentially nothing for them.
So again,
right?
Think about it. That's the truth. And Matt Miller will clumsily tap dance around it. But if the whole plan is only in the interest of Israel, and you could argue the Palestinians, which I don't think is even remotely the case when you realize that it's all because Israel wants what's happening and it'll be at the detriment of the Palestinians like everything else they do. If it's not in the interest of Hamas, why does this make sense to anybody when the two people dealing are Hamas and Israel? Because the point that one thing I think he's subtly pointing out is that they don't see it like it's Palestinians versus Israel. That's how Israel sees it. That's how the United States, because that's what they really are doing. It's not about Hamas. It's about destroying Palestine. So that's the truth at the end of the day.
So
Hamas and Hamas. So, but I think the answer to my question, which is what's in it for Hamas, is essentially nothing for them.
So again,
right?
So they claim to represent. I'm not trying to be cute.
They
claim to represent the interests of the Palestinian people.
But you don't believe that, and you've made it clear many, many times that you don't think that they do care about the Palestinian people.
This proposal puts that question very squarely.
But didn't the last one and the one before that and the one before that?
And given that this one is nearly identical to the one that Hamas presented, I think it puts it more squarely.
My last one, I want to focus on this nearly identical. What does that mean? Because a lot of small changes, I've seen negotiations break down over the placement of punctuation marks, commas, dashes. What do you mean nearly identical?
And that I can't get into in detail from here at the podium, but I will say if you look at the major elements of this proposal, they are nearly identical to the major elements of the proposal that Hamas submitted several weeks ago. There are some minor differences. There are differences that we think that can be bridged.
And the reason they won't tell you what they are is because there are no differences. I mean, the reality being, at least in the case we're discussing, there might have been other things that have happened since. They've accepted what Israel put forward according to literally everybody, including Israel. So the nearly identical is a game.
And it's not just the United States thinks they can be bridged. There are differences that the other mediators, Egypt and Qatar, think can be bridged. I think actually Hamas. This is a serious enough proposal that Hamas should just accept it. But if there need to be further negotiations, we think those are all imminently bridgeable if, and this is the if Hamas wants a deal.
And are there nearly?
If Hamas, can you imagine even saying that with a straight face right now, despite the fact that they've accepted it numerous times and Israel lies about that and he knows that?
Identical, does that apply to?
Those are all imminently bridgeable if, and this is the if Hamas wants a deal.
And are there nearly identical, does that apply to what the Israelis submitted? Or is this word for word what the Israelis submitted?
The proposal that went to Hamas, it is what the Israelis submitted.
Word for word.
Yeah, it is.
So in other words, the nearly identical does not apply to the Israeli.
That is a comparison between the Israeli proposal, which is what went to Hamas on Thursday, and the proposal that Hamas submitted several weeks ago.
There it is. He just said the wrong thing. So what they sent to them on Thursday was exactly what Israel put forward, and they accepted, as is easily provable, and Israel backed away. I mean, you just can't lie about everything without eventually, as I've said many times over the years, stepping on a previous lie. They are caught in every possible way. And now you've got the example, and I hope the ICJ and the ICC are paying attention, of the US government facilitating the ongoing genocide by gaslighting everybody into pretending like they didn't just completely disregard their own agreement. And here's what Tiberius is highlighting. Of course, tagging Matt Miller's ridiculous statement and reiterating what he said before. And this is how it's been going. Hamas consistently says we want a full prisoner exchange and a permanent ceasefire. Don't forget, 11 or 12 times now, in different varying ways, they've offered exactly what Israel pretends they want, and they've refused over and over and over. The first so many months, they pretended like it wasn't even happening, acting like Hamas doesn't want a deal, and they're lying, and they were continually refusing it. Then it eventually came out. Consistently, we want a full exchange. Israel, consistently, no, we want to destroy Gaza and murder you all, or frame that as we need to destroy Hamas, which then reads Palestinians in everyone's minds that are paying attention. But either way, no, we want to destroy Hamas. Hamas says no, obviously. The deal is we destroy us? Well, no, that's not going to work for us. The media, Hamas refuses the deal. That's how dumb this is. If the whole time they've been saying, we'll not do this until Hamas is destroyed, how do you pretend there's a deal between the two? The U.S. then responds, here's the exact same deal Hamas offered. Hamas must now accept it. That's what they were just discussing. Hamas says, okay, we'll take it. Israel says, no, we want to destroy Gaza and murder you all. Media ignores the whole thing. It's crazy. How is the independent media the only one? I mean, you know why? Because there's only a sliver of honesty going on out there right now. And here, highlighting what the State Department spokesman said, Matt Miller, urges Hamas leader to accept the ceasefire plan. Quote, if Sinwar decides that he's safe in a tunnel and that this proposal isn't in his interest because he feels safe, that's an assessment he can make. But I think it's very clearly in the interest of the Palestinian people. He's just trying to make a statement that makes it sound like he cares about Palestine. The reality being that they've already accepted it. I can say it 45 more times. But here's what I wanted to point out here. I made this point numerous times, one recently, and it's important to understand that I don't believe that these people are even in Gaza right now, despite the argument they keep making about how they went back right before. Let me show you something. You go back recently. This was last year, or excuse me, 2022, the beginning of 2022. Very clearly says, and now residing in Doha, and this is I-24, Israeli media. Now residing in Doha in Qatar is Khalil Haya, a former lieutenant to Hamas's head in Gaza, Sinwar, who moved overseas following his promotion to manage the organization's relations with Arab and Muslim countries, Ynet reported. Okay, so in 2022, he was in Qatar. Now, you can follow this right up, and here's an interesting one that goes right up until January of 2024. Oh, crap, it went away. Hold on. Where was it now? Shoot, I was like, I'm going to lose it. Oh, wait, did I? No, I didn't. Damn it. The point wasn't this one, if I can grab it real quick. It simply says, oh yeah, I remember what to look for. Hold on. Yeah, perfect. So it says, and this is important. This is January 2024, beginning of this year, well after October 7th. It simply says, the Israeli hunt for Sinwar is playing out in multiple countries, including the United States, Qatar, Egypt. Engage in high-stakes talks aimed at finding an off-ramp for conflict. Hamas's demand, the point is that they don't know where he is. They argue it's in Gaza, but at the end of the day, the point is you can show him and all of the rest were in Qatar. Now, certainly possible he found his way into Gaza. I question whether or not these people, and the one I just did was much more extensive, that showed very clearly there was numerous elements that showed that they were all in Qatar right before this happened, post-October 7th. Then ask yourself, as I proved in the last show, how they were able to get into Gaza at a point when they were locking it down. Now, certainly possible, tunnels and whatever else. But I think what's happening here is they're trying to frame this as these people are running this in Gaza, when I think very clearly the groups that they support, fund, and protect are being protected in Qatar. As I played in that opening clip many times, as the former head of Shin Bet and the former Prime Minister Barack will tell you, they sent $1.4 billion to fund Hamas. Or even just this one that we've showed many times as well, in 2020. Well, after that billions of dollars they sent them, Mossad chief goes to Qatar to urge them to continue funding Hamas. I mean, we need to really understand what's going on here. Now, that doesn't mean that I think all of Hamas itself as an entity has completely been under Israel's control to this day, because I think it's changed a lot by, as Robert's covered, what's happened and people that have grown up and joined this because they want to fight for resistance. but they're actively trying to, I think, to control this. This is my opinion, other than things we can prove here. So my point is, when he's saying he's in a tunnel down there, and if it's up to him, I don't think that's even what's going on. Just to make that point clear. I think they're actively pretending like they're all there to make this seem like they're running this, when that's why they actively point back to them sitting in Qatar and say, look at them, they said they hate all the Jews. And it's all about trying to keep that narrative spinning. That's my opinion. But just question whether or not these people are actually where they say they are. Now, going forward on this point about the ceasefire. Oh, yeah. And that was another point, too, that I wanted to, I just wrote this down to remind myself. There, interestingly enough, in one of these articles, it was on the NBC one I just closed, they make a point to highlight the fact that Sinwar has a stronghold. This goes back way before October 7th, and it could be a lie too, but that he has a stronghold in Khan Yunis, according to Israel. So my point was, think about the idea of sending all of the people in Gaza to Khan Yunis as a safe area, and then bombing Khan Yunis. You know why? Well, because they've got tunnels there. There's Hamas is there. Okay, well, if you can prove that they already argued that Sinwar had a headquarters in Khan Yunis, why did you send all the Palestinians to Khan Yunis to later bomb it? I think you know the answer to that, because the whole plan is to put them in places where you can justify killing them. If you can't recognize by now that's happening, I don't think you're paying attention. Now, here is how the U.S. government in many ways responded to this, other than Matt Miller and the rest. Mr. John Fetterman says, stop pretending Hamas has any interest in true peace, because he knows, right? Wall Street Journal says Israel and Hamas at odds over back ceasefire. That's how the Wall Street Journal, the ridiculous corporate media, are framing this. Oh, they're at odds? You mean the fact that they accepted it and Israel ran away screaming with its hair on fire? Yeah, it's not at odds. They've lost. They've been embarrassed. He says, I remain standing with Israel in its right to eradicate Hamas. Think about now framing that as a right to eradicate something. Is that what we're talking about? Funny how the right to defense suddenly became a right to destroy something entirely, and strongly reject any international pressure, interference, or commentary. Right. So we respect international law, but we also respect Israel's right to ignore all of that when they want to. You're real smart, John. You always show the wrong thing in the wrong way. And I think this is funny to me, as Israel kind of taps these kind of people that just don't even know how to write a sentence properly. Like what he just said there highlights the exact opposite of what I think they were trying to get him to say. But in any case, this person, Dutchy, highlights, you're paid to not care about the murdering of over 100,000 children with famine. He says, don't pretend your stance is moral or ethical. You're just a sellout, bottom feeding for donations. Now, I don't think we can prove, other than the AIPAC money, that they're getting at something else, but I agree with that. Overall, the point is, strongly reject any international pressure interference, as they're literally being accused of genocide by international law. But, that doesn't count when it comes to Israel. Well, Ben-Gvir reiterates today their threat to leave the government if Netanyahu accepts the hostage deal. So on top of everything else, they've got very clear pressure continuing to this very day from their most extreme elements that if they take the deal that Israel's proposing, that they'll burn the whole thing to the ground. I think that's an important part of this, obviously. And then, of course, going forward, as they're pretending there's a ceasefire deal and they're talking about this, Israel's murdering children in Gaza. Israel strikes in central Gaza, killing at least 11 as the U.S. pushes a ceasefire plan. So you think Israel sounds like they're interested in a ceasefire plan while they're continuing to murder children and women? Because that's what just happened. And we're talking about refugee camps here, guys. And one of them was Nusrat, again, killing women and children. The Israeli military said the body, and we'll get into that in a second, actually. That's the argument of one of these hostages. But on top of that, here's Khaleesi highlighting, and this is somebody being arrested in Jerusalem. You know why? This was a former advisor to labor legislator Nama Lazimi. She was calling for a ceasefire. Apparently, that's illegal to the point to being beat up on the ground as a woman. Look at how violently look at this. She's not armed. They're rubbing. Look what they're doing to her. Look at that, guys. That's crazy. Looks just like what we see in this country, yeah. Wonder why they're training each other. Bottom line is, she called for a ceasefire. This is how they punished her. Horrific, she says. Has Israel ever been a democracy? As if that's even what we should want. But this is the same. Look at that. The guy just kneed her in the face. This is outrageous. This is the kind of thing that your government acts like they want to stop, but completely supports, if not endorses, if not uses themselves, and pretends it's happening elsewhere. Now, in the conversation of the hostages, we're going to talk about the Hannibal Directive again. Now, Suppressed News highlights these three men. We've seen this video before. right? This was the video that came out, and they were saying, look, these people are suffering. Now, of course, you can easily point out the idea that Hamas took them. Now, when we get into the dynamic of the IDF, settlers, police, and reservists, and the idea of the occupied territories and the legal right of armed resistance, it changes the dynamic of just, they're all illegally taken, they're hostages, and it's all terrorism. But the point is, regardless of whether you think these were justified detainees or hostages, the point is that Hamas has been clearly, and remember, 99% of the people that have been brought back have all continued to argue they were treated kindly, they were fed, they were given medical treatment. Only a few of them, and by the way, all of them said that when they came out. Only a few of them have randomly changed their story after, being involuntarily detained and from mental institute, things like that, which is not a joke. I'll just show you that since, I'm sure things like that are hard for people to wrap their mind around. Music festival massacre survivors involuntarily committed due to mental breakdowns. Is that what you think happened? In any case, Suppressed News says Israel is lying again about the captives found today, Hannibal Directive. Among the bodies, and the point is they're arguing that they found these people. 4 hostages were murdered in Gaza, they say. Murdered. And my immediate response to her was, well, here is what they reported. The cause of death has not been determined according to the Israeli military. And I simply said, why do you lie about everything? Right? I mean, if you're saying they're murdered, that seems to suggest that you know something that the military said they don't know yet. Just because the game is use whatever's in front of us to achieve Zionist agenda. Lie some more, right? Because isn't that what they do? Isn't that what people have told us that they do?
Let me preface these remarks with I never, ever believe Israeli figures.
So the point, going back to the discussion, is he's saying among the bodies found by the IDF was the names I'm probably going to manipulate because I'm terrible to pronunciation, but it says Amram Israel Cooper Abu Abaida already announced his death along with others in a statement on the 23rd of December. Saying, quote, as a result of the barbaric Zionist bombing, we lost contact with the group responsible for 5 Zionist prisoners. Of course, it's possible they're lying. That's always there. It's certainly possible that they killed them themselves and made this up. It's certainly possible. Anything's possible. But it's also possible that they were killed by IDF bombs. And I don't know why that's not the most obvious example of all of this, seeing as how they've let many people back that have all pretty much unanimously, other than slightly changing it later, said that they were treated kindly. They were fed. They were kept safe. And the point is, they've said many times that we won't hurt you because it's against our religion or because we want you to get our own hostages back. There's more than enough evidence, aside from the narratives about what they say they are, to prove in many cases so far, and everything we can see, that that's not what they're trying to do. Just murder them for no reason. I mean, why would they take them hostage and go through all that struggle, then to just kill them later? I mean, again, it's certainly possible, but the logic is not there. So the reality becomes, based on all the evidence, that it's most likely that they were killed like many of the others, according to other hostages who have come back, who have said, I watched other people killed by these bombings, and said that they will suffer their nightmares based on the bombings and the rattling of the buildings, and some of them have hearing damage because of the IDF bombs. They're saying it to this very day, by the way. We've covered it on this show. So when they say that they were killed by the bombs, that seems like the most likely scenario. It says, as a result, they were killed by the bombs. And it says, then on the 1st of March, he confirmed that they were killed by Israeli strikes along with fighters from Hamas. After examination and verification during the recent weeks, we have confirmed the martyrdom of a number of our fighters and the killing of 7 of the enemy's prisoners. Now, I am convinced at some level this is deliberate. Now, whether that's indiscriminate, not concern, or targeting them because they know what they're going to say when they come back, including what they know about October 7th, which I think is a huge part of this, I think that's what's happening. Now, it says they released the video as well, showing you that, and we covered this at the time. Now, it says that they died of wounds he sustained in the aircraft target. And again, at the time, they used this to say, look, take a deal. These people are hurt. And again, these are people in Gaza that don't have food. I mean, they have arguably whatever they have stored. But even then, realize that they're running out of stuff. They don't have food. They don't have water. They don't have the medical treatment they need because these things have been suppressed long before October 7th. And the idea of the medical treatment is important. Remember, that one girl got some kind of a veterinarian drug that helped her. And they, of course, made a big deal about that. The point is they gave her medical treatment, for crying out loud, at a place where they don't seem to have a lot of medical treatment, even for other children in Gaza. And the point is that they said, look, you take the deal, these people are going to die. And then they did. His health condition deteriorated and he died because he did not receive intensive medical care. So they said. Of course, it could be a lie, but it seems to line up with everything we know. And he says, what is explained is confirmed with the following from Hebrew News, Ynet. The text says, Nadad, Him, and Iram and Yoram were apparently killed together, as in the IDF maneuvered in Khan Yunis. That's Israeli media. Now, just like with the Bibas family, where the father and evidence suggests and shows, as Gan Cohen has highlighted, that even CBS was forced to admit that they were killed by IDF bombs. They then later say, well, actually, the Bibas, in the most disgusting way, they continue to pretend like they're still alive because they can manipulate heartstrings with that. Every one of them, Eli David, Elon Levy, Eva Vaklampus, David Kohler, all of these propagandists have used, I mean, it's almost sometimes multiple times a day. I think they clearly have their marching orders. They post a picture and say, where are the Bibas family? Same thing here. They know they were killed. Even the Ynet News has reported that they were killed by IDF bombs, and they go on and say they murdered them because they're lying about everything. Now, Hamas predicted it and tried to warn them, but they didn't listen, as he writes. The following was published on May 25th, 2024, with the title, This is How They Will Bring Them Back, with a picture of a coffin. At the beginning of the video, Netanyahu says, since the beginning of the war, we have been working to bring all the prisoners home without stopping, which is not true, as it's been proven many times by now. And he says, Gantz says, we are making a tremendous effort to return the prisoners. They're just highlighting that they say these things and then let them die. Oh, and then it ends by saying the Association of Families of Israeli Prisoners says they were kidnapped alive and should have returned alive to their homes. See, my point is, just like he's highlighting, the Association of Families of Israeli Prisoners are highlighting that it's Israel's responsibility. They've had opportunity after opportunity, and they've squandered it or ignored it or lied about it. Now, either way you look at that, that means they had an opportunity to bring them home, and now they're dead. Even if you think Hamas killed them, these families are currently blaming Israel for that. Now, here again is what she's saying. They were murdered in Gaza. They were abducted from their safe room, saying, and said same thing, just telling you what happened to them, how they were abducted. And I simply highlighted why you're lying about everything, because that's what they did report. The additional hostage found dead was Pompwell. The cause of death has not been determined, according to an Israeli spokesman. And the point is, it's the same point with this. Oops, dang it. Did I highlight all that? That's all right here. There's the ones we're talking about. And then, of course, they always include October 7th information. So the point. Oh, and here's I should have put that first, actually. Here's the other one. And this one's even more interesting. So again, the point with that is simply that evidence suggests many different angles of it that they were killed before. And now suddenly they find their bodies, right? And the point being that they continue, like the hostages that they killed that were their own people after they shot them, even knowing that they were Israeli hostages. Everything suggests that this is not by accident, but you can decide for yourself. This one is a little bit more disconcerting. It says the IDF announced it found the remains of Dolev Yehud, thought to have been taken hostage. 36-year-old from kibbutz near Oz was a paramedic who left his home saying he was murdered by terrorists. Well, again, I mean, the idea that you just assume all of that, of course, they're not going to say maybe by the IDF. They don't even admit that happened, even though there's more evidence to that than nearly anything else in this conversation. If you haven't seen that, by the way, again, it's tank drivers, helicopter pilots, security heads at Kibbutz Be'eri, IDF members were crying out loud. They've on the record said this was a Hannibal, admitted to kill Yasmin Porat, one of the hostages, watched them bomb a house full of their own hostages on the 7th and bombed the cars as they drove back to Gaza and continued to bomb them while they're there and starve them as well by not letting aid in. But the interesting part about this is they said they just found it. Now, here's what's interesting. She is reporting they just found the remains. Of course, elsewhere, you're finding that they have had it somewhere and it took 9 months to identify them. Neither one of those things makes sense. Somehow you're trying to tell me they just discovered this person's body after 8 months? Think about what that would mean to the body sitting out in some area, which clearly they have investigated with a fine-tooth comb. They've had tours going through this area. They've brought people from abroad and walked them around and shown them the areas. We've all seen this. And you're going to pretend that you just found his body? Well, that's ridiculous. Alternatively, one of the arguments is that they have had the body, that they collected all these bodies and they could identify them. And somehow it took 8 months for them to figure out who it was. You think that makes sense? I guess it's certainly possible. In any case, there's something much more nefarious going on here based on everything that we know. And again, yes, what Yari Cohen says, and this is a student in Israel, by the way, saying it took 9 months to identify his remains. Now, I think what they're actually trying to argue here is that it implies that it's that gruesome. But I think we know by now is that some of the most gruesome things were not committed by Hamas. But it says, take a good moment to think about that. I just don't. I think this is indicative of a massive lie. Using these people like everything else. Now, as this is happening, this is what people like Klompus are posting. And I think this is just embarrassing. And I don't know which protest this is, but typically what you find in these protests is, you know, it's an Israeli protest. And he's probably got like 4 people with Israeli flags and then a gigantic Palestinian protest. But what you have is a guy with a mask on. What I think looks like he's got like a Palestinian flag maybe around his back. And he's holding a ridiculous sign that says, kill hostages now. It looks like it was sprayed with something 30 seconds ago. Kill hostages now. Now, does that sound like something that people are fighting for a ceasefire would ask for? Now, I guarantee there's somebody out there that thinks that way. Maybe even part of these protests or part of the pro-Palestine. But to think that that is somehow what she says, imagine being so very evil as to hold a sign that reads, kill hostages now. Oh, you mean like Israel's been doing? You mean like somebody posted down here that literally shows them standing with a sign that says, kill them all? Which is a real post that I've shown many times. It's not a joke. And yes, it does seem odd that it's facing backward, but this is posted by an Israeli outlet. I've done this many times. Reverse image search it. It's a very real image. This is an Israeli standing, and this is protesting a situation where it was Palestinians were hurt by Israelis. And the point was, it says, kill them all, talking about Palestinians. Or bringing this into October 7th forward, where all the people out there are saying, kill them all, kill the Palestinians, destroy them all, level it all, Amalek. Right? We all know this. And her argument is, imagine being so evil as to say that. I mean, I don't believe this for a second, even though you have the counterbalance to prove the opposite. I say this is so desperate and obvious. Does anyone buy these flimsy attempts to paint those against the genocide in Gaza as something they're not? My point in all of this is we have 45 examples in just since October 7th of, and I remember I threw out, but a lot of examples of Zionists being caught lying about this. The woman with their being stabbed in the eye, people going in these areas going, don't hit me. And they're making these things up. It's embarrassing. So I don't know why anybody would believe this makes sense. And even let's just say it's real. Why would you assume that's what everybody over there thinks when you can prove that it's not? Because they're desperate. Because they see the world seeing who they are, and all they can do is lie about it. And Tiberius makes the point about the hostages, right? Well, bring the hostage home, release them, right? Well, look who has more hostages right now. And this is the graph that's been circulating, but it's provable. I've talked about this many times. And by the way, it's a hell of a lot more than just 3,424. Those are just what they admit to. And that's what it says down there. And on top of that, that's just detainees as well, which administrative detainees, which means they're held without charge or trial. Many of them children, some of which we've seen in total for 20 years plus. But Israel's holding more hostages than Hamas. 3,424 admitted to administrative detainees. Think about that. Admitting to holding over 3,000 people without charge. 132 held by Hamas. And even then, they've killed many of them already. Israel has. How does that not make sense to you? Why are we pretending like, because the narrative is they're all terrorists? Yeah, it's pretty simple when you just whitewash the entire thing as all Palestinians are terrorists, like Laura Loomer would tell you, because they're ridiculous subhuman people in my mind that will paint these things as they're all evil and disgusting, kill them all, acting like they're the ones fighting for truth and freedom. It makes me sick. Now, in a discussion about aid, which is a huge part of the hostage conversation, what you're seeing here is a child that just died of starvation. Not the first in Gaza. U.S. falsified Gaza aid report. My point in including this in the hostage conversation is, let's not forget, not allowing aid in is hurting their hostages too. They know that and they don't care. So watch this show if you want to understand more about that specifically, but I'm going to play this clip that talks about that. Cuds News Network highlights this. It's subject, and this is PBS News speaking with the person that resigned from the State Department. Here's what she has to say. Oh, and first it starts with Patel pretending that they don't lie about this stuff. And then you listen to the State Department person say they lied about this stuff.
We stand by the National Security Memorandum 20 report. We are not an administration or a department that twists the facts, and allegations that we have are unfounded.
Did the State Department twist the facts?
They did. Again, the subject matter experts are in consensus on this, that Israel has blocked humanitarian assistance in many ways.
The report that you drafted, that you saw, the version of the report that you saw was changed, you told me earlier today, by undersecretary level, kind of number 3 level underneath the Secretary of State. Isn't that normal, though? Isn't it normal for people like you to draft things and then the ultimate decision goes to higher level people, including the Secretary?
What typically happens is the subject matter experts draft the report and it goes through a clearance process. That's very common. In this case, subject matter experts were removed from the report and it was drafted at a higher level. That's not to say there aren't other constraints that the humanitarian aid organizations face, but I'm also resigning in part to speak up for them.
And we talked about this in that previous show that I just highlighted. The report is very clear, and she's not the only one resigning. I mean, we even have the one, I'll just play it since I have it right here, that resigned in regard to a different topic, but in the same conversation.
We have to condemn the atrocities that happen every day to Palestinians in the West Bank. You mentioned sexual violence. I was part of the human rights vetting process for arms going to Israel, and a charity called Defense of Children International Palestine drew our attention at the State Department to the sexual assault, actually the rape of a 13-year-old boy that occurred in an Israeli prison in the Mosque Bia in Jerusalem. We examined these allegations. We believe they were credible. We put them to the government of Israel. And you know what happened the next day? The IDF went into the DCIP offices and removed all their computers and declared them a terrorist entity. I think it is vital that atrocities not happen to anyone, not sexual violations, not any kind of gross violation of human rights. We are looking at a situation where there is so much dehumanification, where people are not seen.
Now here is the ongoing reality, and this is from Doctors Without Borders, highlighting the proposal to designate UNRWA as a terrorist organization, an outrageous attack on humanitarian assistance, which, by the way, according to everybody involved, including Canada and the United States, Israel has yet to provide any evidence that UNRWA was part of October 7th or is working with Hamas. That's been reported by every one of their allies, in fact, or everyone, but the main primary Israel. Of course, that's not actually more true than we realize, but the idea being that United States and Canada, and I think there was one other, in fact, that the primary have spoken up as of a month and a half ago, according to The Guardian, and said they have not produced any evidence. This is, this might be this is March. Israel yet to provide evidence to back up UNRWA 7th claims, October 7th claims. The point is that they're destroying this entity for reasons that are about the right of return and Palestinian existence, under a guise that they're Hamas, because that's what people that are following along with their narrative will happily jump to. Oh, they're terrorists, so we have to pretend they're not. I mean, this is what they continue to do, while supporting the Azov movement, while supporting the moderate rebels, while supporting Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's painful how clear all this is. And so what they're doing is attacking both the aid process, but also the people that keep track of the records of the right of return. And what they're overall doing is maintaining the illusion of fighting against the terrorism while destroying all of Palestine and equally starving all Palestinians, but also the hostages that are present. Here, Saul Staniforth highlights a family, and by the way, we just showed you the 3 brothers who started a little like a street side kitchen where they just made with whatever they could find, and they were feeding people as best they could. Israel bombed all 3 of them at the same time and killed them. Because Hamas, apparently, or just because they're feeding people and they don't like that. Here's another example. A family turned their kitchen into a free food distribution point for displaced people. Israel bombed their car and killed them. That's the story. That's what we're dealing with.
The saddest people were in a separate attack.
It's just disgusting, and how and your government is allowing and in fact promoting this. Now, here's a point that we've talked about already. This man was walking and thought he saw a can of tuna, which, by the way, is usually left out, I argue, for children. But we've talked about this. They're not cans. They're bombs that are made to look like cans of food that they leave around. They booby trap. And he picked it up, thought he opened it because he was starving, and he blew his legs off. That's what happened. Was hungry, looking for food with a canned tuna after Israel withdrew. Now, actually, this was in another language, but I think what we're actually talking about is a 14-year. Yeah, look, I misread that. So that I'm exactly what I was saying then. 14-year-old. Mohammed Samar. This might be his father then speaking. This is what happened to him. It's a little bit grayed out, but look, his legs were blown apart because he thought he was finding food. Exploded and cost him his 2 legs and 1 arm, and the other was left with 3 fingers. This is what they're doing. How are you going to pretend like they're actively trying to feed everybody while you fire on the flour massacre, and you fire on food? The WCK example, you fire on aid workers, try to bring them food. You block the aid like everyone's telling you, and you even lay out fake food that explodes when they try to eat it. This is the reality of the Zionist government, guys, and it's everywhere you look. And then you got the Aviv Compass people that will pretend like they're feeding them more than they've ever had, while knowing that they're starving them, while supporting the killing of all Palestinians, because there's something supremely evil about what we're dealing with here. Again, as I keep showing you, almost every day, Kogat jumps up and lies. The UN's only collected 135 aid trucks out of 600, even though everybody else involved is pretending or admitting that they're pretending that they're giving trucks through, or bringing it to areas that they know they can't get to, or shooting them when they try and saying, why aren't they getting it? They're literally playing a game with these lives, as well as people that are not Palestinian or not even from the area, people that are aid workers from other countries. And they've done this many times. They've killed UN members from other countries. They've killed aid workers from other countries. And all these countries just look the other way. How do you make sense of that? Point is, she says 600 trucks were supposed to go into Gaza on June 1st. Well, guess what, guys? We know they're lying. The numbers that we can see that are backed up by everybody, average of 60 trucks a day. And here's what I'll make this point even based on their information. This is from today. Of course, AIPAC, who's actively fighting for the interest of a foreign country, which they should be registered as such, Israel continues to surge aid into Gaza. Kogat literally says this month of May, so this is an easy one to call them out for. They couldn't just keep pretending like they surged a couple of days with big trucks. No, they have to make a big number. The month of May saw they say a record number of food trucks, not since October 7th. They're arguing that this is a record. How many times I keep telling you this? Not only are they lying about what they're doing, they're going so far as to say that they're bringing more food than ever. They're breaking records by bringing food in. They're lying to you. It says, we will continue expanding our efforts. And here's the number. That breaks down to about 160 a month. Or excuse me, a day on average. Okay, so even their pretend numbers are proving that they're starving these people. 500 trucks a day, including fuel, are what we're going through before October 7th. And you've heard me say this many times. Even then, they were food insecure. So as we've proven, when they basically dropped it to nothing for the first month, that's 9 on average. It was 0 for the first 2 weeks. They kickstarted the famine. They were already insecure. They didn't bring anything in, nothing, and they immediately fell into dangerous starvation territory. Then from this point forward, and the number you should focus on is the average down here per day. 83 a day, 97 a day for the month of December, 130 a day for the month of January. Now, it doesn't matter whether you surge in 600 one day, which, by the way, they're not even telling the truth about that. But let's say they did. It comes down to the amount you're consecutively, continually bringing in. And the argument that why should they have to get it? Well, those are 2 separate arguments. You can debate whether they should be getting it, but acknowledge that they're not giving what they need to survive. The point about whether they should get it is obviously valid because these are refugees that are displaced from their own territory, who are told they're eventually going to get it back, the right of return, and Israel's never allowed this. So to pretend it's anybody else's fault but Israel is dishonest. But regardless, they're starving to death, and they're not bringing what they need while pretending they're bringing in everything. Month of February, 91 a day. March, 139 a day. Or April, 169 a day. Down from 500 when they were already food insecure. May was the most you've seen in a while, 213 average a day. Right? So they are dramatically less than what they've already needed to survive. Look at this one. From May 7th to the 30th, it's been 60 a day. 60 a day. So you can combine those and the average drops to what? Like 170, something like that, probably. The point is, they're claiming that they've broken a record with May. The number they're claiming is even a lie because that's 160 a day. But even that is less than 500, which means they're actively starving them, even with what they claim broke records. It's just the most simple thing in the world. The problem is that people just don't care, or they find this confusing, or they don't want to know about it. They are starving them, even if these numbers are true. That's the only thing you need to understand. That's according to literally everybody, human rights groups, the United Nations, World Food Program, everybody other than the United States, and Israel, because even the U.S. has admitted more than once that they're restricting aid. And that goes back to the report we just told you. The report from the State Department said that they are provably restricting aid. The United States disregarded that, lied about it publicly. She resigned. It just couldn't get more simple than this. Break this down for yourself and continue to keep this the link, because it continues to prove they're lying to you. Now, on top of that, I just want to include this. While they're doing this and leaving cans that kill children or blow their legs off and shooting innocent people in the streets, shooting people with white flags, killing their own hostages, starving everybody, bombing areas they shouldn't be, U.S. troops are on the ground. We've proven this from the very beginning, but more and more it continues to be obvious. Now, I don't care that this person is teaching an American soldier how to pray in Judaism. I argue this is put out in order to cause some kind of reaction to make it, see, they're all racist. They really just hate all the Jews. That's constantly what the Zionists are trying to manufacture. I don't care. He can practice whatever he wants. I care that you have U.S. soldiers in Israel fighting for a genocide. That's what I care about. You can pray however you want. Because the video is simply saying an Israeli soldier teaches an American soldier how to pray. Whatever. They love to pretend that we're racist. The point is, we care. I care about the fact that they're killing children. And the same point here. Here is 2 U.S. soldiers in Gaza fighting with the IDF murdering children. They both have Israeli flags in 2 places. Those are American soldiers. Now, a couple quick points to show you what also is happening, aside from the focus of the ceasefire, Rafah, and so on, which is also destructive and terrifying. But we're going to end with the human shield example. Nadar points out Israel just dropped a bomb on a building filled with civilians in broad daylight in al-Nusra refugee camp, which, by the way, has been reported by AP and plenty of others. They bombed al-Nusra refugee camp again, and you could see it happening in a building that was verifiably full of civilians. Nobody seems to care in the U.S. government. Alon Mizrahi points out, have you heard about this? In South Africa, this guy here, admitting on camera, by the way, which you can listen to for yourself, this man entered a family home, murdered a woman, and stabbed her husband and son. The reason, he admits down here, pro-Palestine views. We remember the Wadia Al-Fayoum, the 6-year-old from Chicago we talked about, who was stabbed 26 times by an Islamophobe Chicago landlord, who caused serious injuries to his mother as well, and the 3 Palestinian college students who were shot in Vermont. The sense that Palestinian blood is like water and can be spilled with impunity, created by endless U.S. press briefings and endless unconditional support, is poisoning the minds of a million fragile white men, he says. Now, you could frame that however you want. Obviously, he's got a very clear opinion in that regard. I don't think it's about white or anything else. I think it's about people that are blindly following the idea that this is somehow okay. Whether it's about Syrians, whether it's about Gazans or Palestinians, whether it's about anybody else, Iranians. The results are already disastrous. He said it may get a lot worse. The point is, and this, remember, he's an Israeli Jew speaking about this. Now, Francesca Albanese highlights what I was saying earlier. This post simply says important. Not many are talking about this, but it is heavily reported. In recent days, Israeli forces intensified wholesale destruction, controlled demolitions of entire residential blocks. I've shown you videos of this. Yuras Tarawi has been highlighting this. Jabalia, all these locations that they're currently bombing, claiming we had Hamas, and you can see that they're setting up controlled demolitions and exploding them, which proves that they didn't need to do that, which means it's a war crime. And it's endless. You can watch these videos that show you. It's all very clear. What she highlights is leaving nothing Palestinians can return to while massacring them, the essence of Israel's genocidal logic. Sarah highlights, while this is happening, bringing us back to Lebanon. Remember, Lebanon is now bombing in Golan Heights, or rather Hezbollah specifically, because of the back and forth with these locations with Lebanon and the idea that this is bigger than just one of these locations. They used white phosphorus. Israel used white phosphorus, burning South Lebanon's forests, olive trees, farmlands, poisoning the soil, which is one reason they use it. Same with Gaza. Animals, water, poisoning it. This is ecocide, she writes. And yet, the, quote, international community remains silent as always. Now, before you recoil on the idea that we would assume they're using white, realize this is not a new thing. And I'm going to show you the endless reports about how they've been caught using white phosphorus, and we still disagree. The idea that Israel will publicly do it, the United States will publicly do it, their allies will publicly do it, and just they all equally pretend it's not happening. Elijah Manye highlights Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich said, quote, "It is important to bomb Beirut, Lebanon, so that the Lebanese will be busy dealing with the damage they will suffer." Smotrich said this. He has no idea what would happen to Tel Aviv if Beirut was bombed, he writes. It's true. Smotrich said the roadmap of the idea is actually a ceasefire plan presented by the Israeli War Cabinet. I told Netanyahu that we will stand by him if he continues the war, and if he goes for any deal, we will do everything to bring down the government. So he's openly saying we should just murder people in a major civilian populated area because that will keep them distracted. These are leading elements in the Israeli government publicly saying this, and Matt Miller pretends like it's all about freedom because they're ridiculous and they're dangerous. But in regard to that, my point is he's telling you, bomb Beirut, bomb Lebanon, and they're doing this. They're bombing it with white phosphorus. Here is Human Rights Watch, 2009, Rain of Fire, Israel's unlawful use of white phosphorus. Here's Amnesty International, 2009. Israel's use of white phosphorus against Gaza civilians, clear and undeniable. Guess what happened? Literally nothing. Here's Human Rights Watch again, October 12th. After October 7th, 2023, Israel, white phosphorus used in Lebanon. Not even the first time. Here's the Washington Post, 2023. Israel appears to use white phosphorus in Gaza. So this is October 12th, post October 7th. They're using it in Gaza, using it in Lebanon, and even the corporate media is highlighting it. And yet there's no outrage. Anyone will make sense of that? Well, it's easy to make sense of. It's because they don't believe anything they pretend they do. Not the United States, not any of them. The people do, we do. The government pretends to be good people, so you think that that's what they're doing. Actively supporting the terrorists out there. Here is the Jewish Chronicle. B'Tselem, the leading Israeli human rights group, calls for Gaza white phosphorus probe because Israel's using white phosphorus. Here's just some articles from Lost American Vagabond. This was written in November 3rd, 2023. Israel uses white phosphorus on UN school. It was used on an UNRWA school in November 3rd. This one is from February 28, 2022. Ukraine accused of using white phosphorus-filled shells in human shields. They were doing that. It's easy to prove. Here's the picture of it. Nobody cares. Here is Israel caught using white phosphorus on Lebanese village. This was September 1st, 2019. This one is from September 9th, 2018. U.S. jets strike Syrian town with white phosphorus. It's not unique to Israel. It's happening all around with their supposed rules-based international order. Here's an interesting overlap, by the way. 2016, Monsanto exposed as the source for white phosphorus used in Gaza massacre. All the way back in 2016, including Monsanto. That's real stuff, guys. All this is on TLAV, by the way. I'm telling you, if you guys look anything that's going on, you can search in the search bar right here, and you'll find a hell of a lot of content on this platform that goes back a decade or more. This is 2016 as well. Raining down fire. U.S. troops using white phosphorus in Iraq. It's just not unique, guys. And here, to end this segment before we finish with the human shield point, is Lindsey Graham making an argument that nukes should be used. That literally making an argument, an impassioned argument for why we shouldn't restrict Israel's use to use nukes on Gaza. Because, well, we used it in Japan. You already saw him push this argument before. This should scare you. These people, even if this is all a ploy, even if this is all propaganda, the idea that you're stressing that it's normal, accepted, okay, legal even to use nuclear weapons on a civilian location like the U.S. did in Japan that nobody should be okay with. Just because he pretends like we've accepted that, it was illegal then, it's illegal now. That's a crazy thing to do. And on top of that, it's a provable reality that Japan was retreating on every front and they used it anyway to scare Russia, to see what happened. That's the same people we're dealing with today, guys. And he's trying to tell you that this was okay, that it was the right thing to do. And that's why Israel should do it in Gaza. These are people with power.
So when we were faced with destruction as a nation after Pearl Harbor, fighting the Germans and the Japanese,
Nope, they were all retreating at that point, but you can lie about it all you want. Maybe he doesn't even know that.
We decided to end the war by bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki with nuclear weapons. That was the right decision. Give Israel the bombs they need to end the war they can't afford to lose and work with them to minimize casualties. Well, can I say this? Why is it okay for America to drop 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and
It's not.
Nagasaki to end their existential threat war? Why was it okay for us to do that?
It wasn't. It wasn't.
I thought it was okay. To Israel, do whatever you have to do to survive as a Jewish state.
Jeez. And see, she's trying to cut in the whole time. Obviously, that was edited just to get the point out. But she's trying to cut in, and he just is frothing at the mouth trying to scream these points out. This guy's an absolute lunatic. Not just a sociopath. He is a psychopath. That terrifies me, because you realize, what do you think that's going to signal to the Azov movement? What do you think that's going to signal to their other moderate rebels in the world? That apparently it's okay to use nuclear weapons as long as you're on their side. It's terrifying, guys. That's actually terrifying. And the point is, in regard to Japan, like we said before, that they were retreating on all fronts. So my question is, why do you think they used 2 of them, guys? Because they wanted to make sure they could duplicate it, right? Was this a fluke? Are we going to use, if we do this one, is it also going to work? That's how your government thinks about the world. That's why they thought about that when they used the COVID-19 injections and pressured that experiment on you and your families. That's what they did with the Operation Sea Spray conversation, or the 239 times they've admitted to doing testing on innocent people. This is what they do. This is why they brought over the Nazi elements and the Japan elements after World War II. Dr. Ishii and his disgusting biological experiments that they folded into the US government, or the Nazi Operation Paperclip conversation. They took the worst elements of what they claim they were trying to stop and made it their own. Does that sound like people fighting for freedom? We need to understand this should not be reflective on what the people of this country want. They pretend to be good because they know we want that. We can change this. That's what scares them, because year after year, they have collected more power, and they are now happy to damn near show it to you. Scares me. Now, we're going to end with the point about human shield, because this is what they support, guys. People like Lindsey Graham and the rest of them. Remember, Lindsey Graham and the rest that went and spoke with McCain to the Azov movement, said, your war is our war, right? They told him, we're fighting with you and we'll stand by you, long before the conversation of the Ukraine war with Russia. Why? Because they built that. And it's the most easy thing to prove in any of these conversations. And every element of this goes to the same thing. They built this, they manipulated, they lied to you about it.
Нашого народу і нашої держави. І я, як президент, і як Верховний Головнокомандувач, хочу подякувати кожного з вас.
I admire the fact that you will fight for your homeland.
Я захоплююсь тим, що ви боретеся за свою батьківщину.
Your fight is our fight.
Ваша боротьба – це наша боротьба.
2017 will be the year of offense.
Рік 2017 рік буде ріком нападу.
All of us will go back to Washington and we will push the case against Russia.
Ми всі повернемося.
It's not totally not their fault, though. They're not involved at all, right? They're going to go back to Congress and push the idea that we need to make this happen, and then suddenly it happens and Russia invaded. It's pathetic. And people are finally starting to see. And this is what they support. Mondoweiss did a recent post about this. This was on June 1st. Israeli soldiers rounded up Ahmad Safi, which, by the way, we've seen already, and his male family members in Khan Yunis, and made them stand atop a sand dune for 12 hours as the soldiers took cover behind them during a firefight with Palestinian resistance fighters. You can read the article. I have this video, this stuff too. Now, these are, I don't think these are necessarily in order, but my point is some of these are after October 7th, and I'll show you which ones. This is a new example of Israeli soldiers walking with this guy through the middle of the area with a gun to his back, and the rest of them getting ready to fire. That's a human shield. That is literally a human shield. That's what it looks like, guys. Tell me where you see that happening on the other side. Not that it's not possible, but I just don't have the evidence. Oh, well, unless you want to save these. Here's another one. That you just saw this as well. This was actually a pretty publicized one. Yanis Tarawi shared this, an IDF soldier using an older Palestinian as a human shield. I believe this was Rafah. You hear them shooting and so on. He's keeping this guy next to him. Here's another one. This was one from October 7th forward that was really very clear. As you can see, the guy's sitting on his knees with a blindfold, and they're over here with their guns, and they're engaging with people on the other side. This was, look at him. He's hiding right behind him. That's what a human shield looks like. Here's another one. And this one's before October 7th, 2018. Marshall shared this one. Well, oh, I got this one over here, I think. Yeah, right there. So this one, a man is a human shield during the clashes with Jericho, March 9th, 2018, where you can see him sitting the same way they're doing in the other video, handcuffed, blindfolded, and they're engaging behind the car right there shooting. That's a human shield. It's the same game because their idea is that they think they won't shoot if they're using them. That's, by the way, and I'll play the clip at the end, as you expect, the neighbor procedure. Here, oh, that's the one we just showed you. And that just showing you this is, what is it? Al Jazeera highlighting the same thing. Footage showing you this. Longer investigation. They can prove it to you. They're speaking on the record. This is the one we showed earlier. Here's just the video of it. This is the one that Mondawai's highlighted. Right here. We can see him walking. They kept sending him up through the middle, and they would follow behind him. They did this in multiple locations. This is just a quick compilation. You can research. I went over this before. But the point is, the guy later left and got released and spoke to everybody and highlighted exactly what happened. And they stood him there. They shot over him. They walked him into buildings. That's what is easily provable. Here's an older one from before October 7th. That's about as clear as it gets right there, guys. A blindfolded child, hands bound, and they're shooting around the corner at people they're fighting with. Another one where you have the child propped up against the car, and they're engaging and clearly firing at the people on the other side. I mean, all of these you can easily prove. This one, bunch of Mossad-esque, occupation forces holding this child, kidnapping him, and people are trying to get, and they're, holding him. Look. There's just no way to misunderstand this, guys. Now, this one's interesting. Here's Hananya Naftali, the guy that keeps getting caught lying, Mr. Chief Propagandist, who says, look, it's an IDF soldier protecting this guy from the Gaza bad guys. Now, how many times have we seen them say, here, we're giving this old man water, and then shoot that guy in the back? Or going, here, we're helping this woman, and then she later leaves and shows how her wrists were bound, and she almost cut the skin off her hands because they were forcing her to do it. It's constant. And these are provable examples that mainstream media in some cases have called out. The man who got shot in the back was a big case. Human rights groups called it out. So as this woman is cowering and this child looks terrified, I highly doubt that they're keeping that kid safe. But you know what? Certainly possible. Here's Zachary Foster, PhD from Princeton in Palestinian history. A brief history of Israeli military use of Palestinians and human shields. November 10th, 2023. Video shows Israeli soldiers using a blindfolded Palestinian detainee as a human shield in the West Bank. He is seated on the ground with vehicles behind him. This goes back as far as you want to look, guys. This one I've shown you before. It's from IMEU, I believe. Oh, no, this is actually from Defense of Children for Palestine. Israeli forces use 5 Palestinian children as human shields. This one, 2023, I was used as a human shield by Israeli forces. They handcuffed me and started shooting from behind me. This is what they do. We just showed you that one. Easy example. This one, 2014, Israeli soldiers handcuffed and blindfolded us. They made us stand by the windows as protection shields for them. 2014, they refused to let us out. I asked for an ambulance to my sister who fainted. They refused. They held us to protect themselves. I mean, it's on and on. And most of this comes from, and this is from the United Nations. Others are from human rights groups. It's all very easy to prove. And that's, of course, what leads us to the clip itself. You make sure you follow him. We've had a couple of great interviews with him. So this is an article from 2005 from Belfast Telegraph. IDF used Palestinians as human shields 1,200 occasions in the past 5 years, says Israeli defense officials. Here is Haaretz from June 9, 2012. Does the presence of their IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv endanger the city's population? It's a fair question to ask. And they have this graphic down here, I believe, if it's the right, oh, here it is, which simply shows you, look, why would they place their headquarters right in the center between all, even Haaretz is going, doesn't that pose a threat? Yeah. In fact, this is the whole point about how Zionism uses Judaism as a, shield of a sense, or the idea that they built these illegal settlements around the area. So that happened on October 7th. They go through the illegal settlements. That's their human shield. And they used it just like after October 7th, the Hannibal Directive. It's what they do. And here's an interesting one from The Independent, 2018. Israeli army edits video of Palestinian medic, its troops shot dead, to misleadingly show she was a human shield for Hamas. So the examples that they do put out turn out to be fakes, just like the rest of the Zionist propaganda. right? And here's the clip that I've played many times, just so it breaks down the reality that they admitted to doing this. And then they went to something else, and the UN said that is also human shields, and they've never stopped doing it. 2013, Palestinian children tortured, used as shields by Israel, per the United Nations. Reuters. Israeli soldiers who used Palestinian boy, a 9-year-old, as human shields avoid jail. Defense for Children International, an international human rights group. Israel forces use 5 Palestinian children as human shields. That's 2023. This is from 2017. Generally, human shields. Since the beginning of the occupation in 1967, Israeli security forces have repeatedly used Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip as human shields. Israeli soldiers routinely use Palestinian civilians as human shields by forcing them to carry out life-threatening tasks. It was also following a high court petition against this practice, which was filed by human rights organizations around the world in May 2002, that the IDF issued a general order prohibiting the use of Palestinians as a means of human shield against gunfire or attacks by the Palestinian side. But then it goes on to say, following the order, the use of human shields dropped sharply. However, the army did not construe as a human shield the use of Palestinians, provided they consented. The army continued the widespread use of this practice, which they referred to as the neighbor procedure. Following another petition filed by human rights organizations, the High Court of Justice ruled that this practice, too, violated international humanitarian law and that this thus was illegal. And guess what they've never stopped doing? Here is the Institute for Middle East Understanding, the neighbor procedure, Israel's use of Palestinian human shields from 2012. Human Rights Watch. During military operations, Israeli soldiers routinely coerced Palestinian civilians, including children, to perform life-endangering acts that assisted military operations, the practice known as the neighbor procedure. Now, see this? It's like everything else in this conversation. It's very clear. It's right in front of your face. And the only thing that scares you away is being told that you're not supposed to look at it. It's actually secret, racist, manipulative talking points. Despite every leading human rights group and all the evidence behind it, the video you can see for yourself. Don't trust your lying eyes. It's racism. Don't look. As they're literally screaming that they want to kill every Palestinian. It's absurd. And I think this, again, is why so many people are having a hard time looking away. You can't miss what's happening. And even the idea and the point there that they say, well, and as long as they agree, and there's one of these points in there. Well, realize that even if Palestinians agree to be used, it's still an illegal thing to do. But then the point is that they're coerced. Where if you watch the whole episode, that's the point. They at gunpoint say, well, you do. Yes, I'll do what you want. And this is how they play the game. And they use them nonetheless. The point is, even the UN and human rights groups have said even that is illegal. So they admit to, yes, we're using human shields. We'll just change it differently. And they go, well, you're still doing it. And they go, well, we're going to keep doing it. That's to this very day. The neighbor procedure is an active policy. So too is the mowing the grass discussion or the Hannibal Directive or all these really disgusting policies that prove what the Zionist organization really is. I'm hoping that one step at a time we can actually dismantle what this is. And I don't mean just Zionism, because realize that we're dealing with something much darker here. I mean, again, or even just the idea that it's in Israel, Christian Zionists all over the world. Or my point being is that there are people who are Zionists who are doing similar things because of this rampant lawlessness that have spun out of control. The people that care about human life in the world need to stand up and do something about this. And I don't mean violence. I believe we're making a change, what they're doing right this moment. We're watching it happen, especially since the larger grouping of this is typically opportunists that will see the writing on the wall and bow to the pressure of what people stand up for. And this is why the two-party illusion is in place. And again, whether that's two parties or the larger illusion in Britain, the idea being that it's really just about the illusion of choice. And in this country, the two-party illusion maintains the idea that we just have to get rid of that before we can do that. And they're both pointing like the scarecrow at something else, and it just continues around. The hamster wheel continues. But I believe we're starting to break it. It's wobbling. I see it. But we're worried about the next thing that they freak out about or highlight or scream, and we lose sight of it as they repair that hamster wheel while we're looking somewhere else. That's what I see. I worry is going to happen. But I see it. I see it wobbling, and I recognize that we can make a difference. We just need to knock it off. Help us do that. Help us continue to highlight this and get it in front, most importantly, of people that are almost there, people that see it but can't get past the two-party paradigm. Show them the bigger picture. highlight for them that this is something much bigger than the political dynamics of this country. It's a worldwide thing that's going on right now. We need to highlight it as such. So thank you for continuing to support this platform. I mean, if you're out there watching this and you find value in what we're doing, if you are somebody who watches this show on a regular basis and you recognize the value in what we do, send us something, right? Even if it's just a word of encouragement, say thank you for what you do. Or if you have the ability, support this platform. And one of the things that we currently have, our mailing address, subscribe star, or any other ways we have donations out there, because we need your support to continue to do this. If you see value in what we're doing, if not, then just watch it for free. I mean, that's what I do. All of what we do is free, because I believe it's more important for you to see this and understand it and discuss it than it is for you to give us something for it. But realize that without that support, this will not be able to continue. And I think that's what we're facing right now. Stripe kicking us off their platform, lawsuits coming from every which way, the IRS coming out. I mean, it's clear this is coming down. And by the way, we might talk more tomorrow about what I see as the mainstream alternative media starting to frame themselves as being attacked by the system, which I just don't believe, but maybe I'm just too jaded about that too. In any case, what we're dealing with is probably, more real than anything we're talking about, and we're going to probably drift away because of what's going on, being distracted by the larger things that are clearly not actually a threat, but maybe that's just my opinion. But I will continue this, fighting for you either way. Thank you for being here. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.